In the golden, suffocating heat of first-century Judea, long before the stones of the Second Temple were reduced to dust and ash by the legions of Rome, an old man walked the colonnades of Jerusalem, carrying a quiet grief that centuries have failed to erase. His beard was the color of crushed frost, his shoulders bent under the weight of nearly a century of human sorrow, yet his eyes burned with an unyielding, luminous devotion. This was Zechariah, known to the Western world as Zechariah, high priest, a prophet, and the solitary guardian of an ancient covenant during one of the darkest spiritual eclipses in human history. To understand this man is to step into an era of brutal Roman iron, corrupt puppet kings, and a fractured priesthood, where whispers behind heavy stone pillars could cost a man his life, and where silence before God was more powerful than the roaring decrees of emperors. Zechariah belonged to the sacred lineage of Aaron, descending from the priestly houses of the children of Israel, who had carried the Ark of the Covenant through the wilderness and tended the flames of the sanctuary for generations. In the Roman client kingdom of Judea, ruled by the paranoid and tyrannical Herod the Great, the faith of Abraham had been deeply compromised. The Roman eagles cast long shadows across Mount Moriah. The temple hierarchy was riddled with political sycophancy, and the common people wept in the alleys, desperate for a voice of authentic divine guidance. Zechariah stood as a pillar amidst this decay. He was neither wealthy nor politically ambitious. He earned his bread through humble labor, serving as a carpenter and craftsman when he was not performing his sacred duties within the sanctuary, exemplifying the rare synthesis of spiritual royalty and earthly humility. His lifelong companion was his wife, known in historical and scriptural traditions as Elizabeth or Ishbah, a righteous woman from the daughters of Aaron. For decades, their union was characterized by deep piety, mutual reverence, and an unspoken, enduring ache. They were barren. In the ancient Near East, childlessness was not merely an emotional tragedy. It was often weaponized by society as a perceived divine curse, a cruel stigma that whispered a forgotten lineage and a severed legacy. Yet Zechariah and his wife never allowed bitterness to poison their hearts. Year after year, as their youth faded into the deep winter of old age, they continued to serve the poor, comfort the broken, and raise their hands in the darkness of night, asking for nothing more than the pleasure of their Creator. The pivotal turning point in Zechariah's twilight years arrived with the birth of a young girl named Maryam, the daughter of Imran. Her mother, Hannah, had consecrated her unborn child entirely to the service of the Holy House. When Hannah brought the infant girl to the temple, a fierce dispute erupted among the priests and learned elders of Jerusalem, each desperate to claim the high honor of fostering the consecrated child. To resolve the dispute without bloodshed, the priests walked down to the banks of the Jordan River. In accordance with an ancient practice, they cast their reed pens, the very instruments used to inscribe the sacred scriptures, into the rushing waters. By divine design, every single pen was swept away downstream by the current, save for one. The pen belonging to Zechariah remained stationary, floating defiantly upstream against the powerful torrent. The sign was absolute, and Zechariah took the infant Maryam into his home and under his protective wing. He built for Maryam a secluded sanctuary, a mihrab elevated high within the temple precincts, accessible only by a single ladder and locked behind secure doors. Zechariah was the only soul permitted to enter, bringing her provisions, fresh water, and checking upon her spiritual seclusion. Yet every time the elderly prophet unlocked the door and stepped inside, he encountered a phenomenon that left him spellbound. Scattered across her chamber were exquisite fruits and provisions of supernatural origin. During the sweltering heat of midsummer, he found fresh, dew-covered fruits that only blossomed in the depths of winter. During the freezing chill of winter, her chamber was fragrant with the harvest of high summer. When Zechariah, astonished and humbled, asked where these provisions had come from, The young girl answered with unwavering tranquility that they were directly from God, who provides sustenance to whomever he wills without measure. Those quiet words within Maryam's chamber struck the depths of Zechariah's soul like a thunderbolt. He stood in the presence of undeniable proof that the Creator is entirely unbound by the laws of nature, seasons, or physical possibility. If God could bring forth summer fruits from the barren cold of winter, could he not bring forth a living, righteous heir from the withered, barren womb of an aged woman? In that sacred space, amidst the fragrance of miraculous sustenance, Zechariah turned his face toward the sanctuary's innermost veil and poured out his soul in a whispered, tear-streaked supplication that remains etched into the immortal memory of sacred history. He did not pray loudly, for true desperation often speaks in a whisper. He called upon his Lord with absolute vulnerability, acknowledging that his bones had grown frail, his hair had flared white with age, and his wife had spent a lifetime in barrenness. He did not ask for a son out of vanity, pride, or the desire to perpetuate an earthly name. His plea was entirely spiritual. He feared what would happen to the children of Israel after his death, knowing that the corrupt and compromised priests waiting in the wings would lead the people astray. He begged for a righteous heir who would inherit the mantle of spiritual wisdom from the house of Jacob, a protector of the divine message who would stand against the incoming tide of darkness. The answer was immediate, shattering the silence of the temple. As Zechariah stood in the incense-filled chamber engaged in prayer, the archangel Gabriel appeared before him in majestic, radiant reality. The heavenly messenger brought good tidings. His prayer had been accepted, and his wife would bear a son whose very name was chosen by the heavens. He was to be named Yehujan, a name never before bestowed upon any human being since the dawn of creation. This child would not be an ordinary man. He would be a noble leader, chaste, deeply learned, a prophet who would confirm the coming word of God and pave the way for the Messiah. Overwhelmed by awe and the sheer magnitude of the promise, Zechariah asked how this could come to pass when he was an old man and his wife barren. The angel replied with absolute divine authority, "It is effortless for God, who created humanity from nothingness when they were not a thing at all." Seeking a personal sign to anchor his heart, Zechariah was told that his sign would be the loss of the ability to speak to people for 3 days and 3 nights, despite having no physical illness or impairment. During this miraculous silence, his tongue would be bound from worldly speech, capable only of glorifying God through continuous remembrance and silent gestures to his congregation. When Zechariah emerged from the temple to the gathering crowds waiting outside, he found his voice silenced. Through gestures and hand signals, he instructed the people to glorify their Lord in the morning and the evening. For 3 days, the prophet lived in profound, contemplative stillness, his heart immersed in gratitude, waiting for the promise of the Almighty to materialize in the flesh. Within a year, the impossible became reality. Elizabeth conceived and gave birth to Yehia, a child whose righteous radiance illuminated the dusty streets of Judea and brought an ocean of joy to his aging parents. As Yehia grew, he was endowed with profound wisdom from his earliest youth. He was compassionate, ascetic, and utterly immune to the temptations of royal courts and worldly wealth. Together, the father and son walked the lands of Palestine as beacons of unyielding truth. But the moral decay of Judea was reaching its boiling point. King Herod Antipas had taken his brother's wife, Herodias, in an unlawful, incestuous union that violated the sacred laws of God. When Yehia fearlessly denounced the king's corruption, he was cast into the desolate fortress of Machaerus and ultimately beheaded to satisfy the sadistic whim of a royal dance. The corrupt authorities and wicked factions of Jerusalem, enraged by the unrelenting truth spoken by the prophetic house, turned their murderous gaze upon the aging patriarch, Zechariah. pursued through the outskirts of the city by armed assassins seeking to extinguish the last voice of sacred conscience. The venerable prophet fled toward an ancient grove. According to profound historical and classical traditions, a massive tree split open by divine command, sheltering the exhausted prophet within its hollow trunk to shield him from the bloodthirsty mob. Yet the dark forces, guided by malicious deception, discovered his sanctuary. Refusing to let the prophet escape their hatred, they brought a massive saw to the base of the tree and cut through both the wood and the prophet inside. Zechariah endured the agony with transcendental patience, entering martyrdom with the praise of the Almighty resting upon his soul. The life of Prophet Zakariah stands as a monument of unshakable faith, offering timeless lessons for every wandering soul across the centuries. He taught humanity that physical impossibility is merely an illusion in the face of divine will, that age and circumstance can never limit the boundless mercy of the Creator, and that the purest prayers are those uttered for the preservation of truth rather than personal glory. His legacy reminds us that even when the entire world descends into corruption, tyranny, and moral darkness, a single whisper of sincere faith from a solitary soul can alter the course of human destiny forever. Beneath the sprawling shadows of the ancient olive groves that cascaded down the jagged hillsides of Judea, the execution of Prophet Zakariah sent a shockwave through the spiritual bedrock of the ancient world, though the corrupt authorities who wielded the blades sought desperately to bury the truth in silence. They believed that by felling the righteous high priest, they had successfully extinguished the flickering flame of prophetic conscience that dared to challenge their tyrannical compromises with Rome. But the blood spilled upon the dry soil of Jerusalem did not vanish into oblivion. It watered the seeds of a spiritual revolution that would soon rewrite the destiny of mankind. To the crowds who had watched Zechariah walk the temple steps with quiet dignity, his martyrdom was not a defeat, but a searing testament to the cost of uncompromising truth. The common folk whispered his name in secret courtyards, weaving his resilience into the collective memory of the oppressed, turning a tragedy of political cruelty into an eternal symbol of spiritual defiance against earthly might. The legacy of Zechariah's quiet household lived on most vibrantly through the life and mission of his miraculous son, Yahya, whom Christians know as John the Baptist. Raised under the watchful eye of a father who understood the profound value of patience and prayer, Yahya had grown into a wild, ascetic prophet of the wilderness. He wore garments of coarse camel hair, girded his waist with a leather belt, and sustained his body on wild honey and locusts found in the desolate canyons near the Jordan River. Unlike the polished, politically malleable priests who walked the marbled floors of the Herodian temple in silken robes, Yahya roared like a lion in the desert, calling out the hypocrisy of the religious elite and summoning the masses to true repentance. He stood at the rushing banks of the Jordan, plunging the repentant into the cleansing waters, preparing their hearts for a monumental shift in the spiritual landscape of human history. The Father's prayers, whispered decades earlier in the secret sanctum of the temple, had thus manifested in a son who became the ultimate bridge between the old covenant and the dawn of a new era. Yahya's entire existence was designed to point away from himself and toward a greater horizon. He openly testified to the crowds that a mightier messenger was coming, one whose sandals he was not worthy to untie, a figure who would baptize humanity not merely with water, but with the purifying fire of the Holy Spirit. When Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Maryam, walked down to the muddy banks of the Jordan to receive baptism, Yahya recognized the divine light radiating from his cousin. In that singular, historic moment, the suffering of Zechariah, the miraculous provisions of Maryam's chamber, and the fierce desert preaching of Yahya all converged into a single, breathtaking divine trajectory. Yet the road of prophecy has never been paved with ease, and the shadow of the cross and the sword hung heavy over the Holy Land. The moral rot that Zechariah had fought against during his lifetime reached its grotesque zenith in the palaces of the ruling class. Herod Antipas, ruling with the capricious cruelty of a Roman vassal, had committed a public scandal by taking his own half-brother's wife, Herodias, as his queen. It was a union that spat in the face of Mosaic law and moral decency. While the rest of the religious establishment swallowed their tongues for fear of losing their titles and temple stipends, Yahya stepped directly into the lion's den. Standing before the king and his court, the prophet refused to sugarcoat the truth, declaring without a hint of fear that it was unlawful for the king to possess his brother's wife. That single, courageous declaration sealed Yahya's fate, plunging him into the subterranean dungeons of the Machaerus fortress, a bleak stronghold perched upon a volcanic peak overlooking the Dead Sea. Within those damp, lightless cells, the desert lion was caged, yet his spirit remained utterly unbroken. He received disciples who brought him news of the burgeoning ministry of Jesus, finding profound solace in the knowledge that the divine mission was unfolding precisely as ordained. But the wrath of Herodias was relentless. Harboring a deep, venomous hatred for the prophet who had dared to expose her shame, she plotted his downfall with calculating malice. During a lavish birthday banquet for the king, Herodias' daughter danced before the intoxicated nobles, enchanting Herod to such a reckless degree that he swore an oath before his guests to give her whatever she desired, up to half his kingdom. Prompted by her vengeful mother, the young girl demanded the immediate execution of Yahya, requesting his head served on a silver platter. Bound by his foolish oath and his own fragile pride before his cronies, Herod acquiesced to the horrific demand. An executioner was dispatched into the dark bowels of the fortress, and the voice that had cried out in the wilderness for righteousness and repentance was silenced by the stroke of a sword. When Yahya's disciples came to claim his broken body, carrying it away to a quiet resting place with tears streaming down their weathered faces, they wept not just for a fallen leader, but for a world that so casually traded truth for political expediency. Yet, just as the blood of Zechariah had fertilized the roots of a spiritual awakening, the martyrdom of Yahya served to catalyze the final phase of the divine message, proving that while tyrants could sever human vocal cords, they could never murder the eternal truth of the Creator. The profound lessons embedded within the lives of Zechariah and Yahya stretch far beyond the dusty pages of antiquity, speaking directly to the modern human condition with startling clarity. Their story confronts the timeless temptation to compromise one's principles for the sake of temporary safety, social acceptance, or material gain. Zechariah labored for a lifetime in an environment of spiritual compromise without ever losing his moral compass, reminding every generation that integrity is not dependent on the righteousness of the society around us, but on the vertical relationship between the individual soul and God. He taught us that despair is a luxury the faithful cannot afford, even when biology, circumstance, and the calendar declare a situation completely impossible. The divine power can rewrite reality in the blink of an eye. Moreover, the father-son dynamic of Zechariah and Yahya offers a masterclass in legacy, parenting, and spiritual stewardship. Zechariah did not merely pray for a child to carry his biological surname. He prayed for a custodian of divine wisdom who would stand as a bulwark against societal decay. In return, Yahya honored his father's legacy by embodying an uncompromising commitment to justice, refusing to bow to the glittering thrones of earthly potentates. Their combined narratives form an unbroken chain of light through one of history's most turbulent epics, demonstrating that empires rise and fall, corrupt high priests fade into infamy, and tyrants are consumed by their own paranoia. But the word of God and the courage of those who uphold it remain standing long after the marble temples have crumbled into dust. The echoes of those two martyrdoms, father and son, Zechariah and Yehia resonated through the limestone alleys of Jerusalem long after their physical bodies had returned to the earth. To the Roman legions stationed at the Antonia fortress, this was merely the internal squabbling of a strange, restless province, a tiny blip on the vast imperial register of Judea. To the corrupt ruling elite and the compromised temple leadership, it felt like a triumph, a clean sweep of the board that silenced the inconvenient voices of moral judgment. Yet beneath the veneer of political stability, the moral foundation of the city had cracked completely, setting into motion an inevitable cycle of divine justice and historical retribution that would soon dismantle the very world they sought to protect. The historical trajectory that followed the deaths of Zechariah and Yehia proved that no empire or religious hierarchy can murder its spiritual conscience without devouring itself from within. Within a few short decades of their sacrifice, the tensions between the oppressed Judean populace and the brutal Roman authorities reached an absolute breaking point. The Great Jewish Revolt erupted in 66 CE, tearing through the countryside like a wild firestorm. The very temple in which Zechariah had once stood in silent prayer, the sacred precincts where the miracle of Maryam's sustenance had unfolded, became the blood-soaked ground of factional civil war and Roman siege. By the summer of 70 CE, the legions under Titus breached the walls, setting the Second Temple ablaze and tearing down its monumental stones until not one was left standing upon another, precisely fulfilling the prophetic warnings that had been dismissed by the arrogant rulers of Zechariah's day. Yet the divine covenant did not die with the fall of stone sanctuaries or the destruction of city walls. It lived on through the spiritual lineage and transformative teachings that Zechariah and his family preserved. In Islamic tradition, tafsir literature, and the Quranic verses of Surah Maryam and Surah Al-Imran, the remembrance of Zechariah is celebrated as one of the highest peaks of human trust in God. His whispered prayer in the secluded chamber is immortalized as the ultimate blueprint for every human being who feels trapped by impossible odds, physical weakness, or social isolation. He demonstrated that true strength does not lie in political leverage, armies, or vast wealth, but in an unbroken, transparent heart that brings its deepest vulnerabilities before the Almighty with absolute certainty of being heard. Across Christian scriptural traditions preserved in the Gospel of Luke, Zechariah is honored as the venerable priest whose prophetic psalm, the Benedictus, announced the dawn of mercy and redemption, heralding the light that breaks upon those who sit in darkness and the shadow of death. In classical Jewish and historical commentaries preserved by historians like Flavius Josephus, the righteous character of this priestly lineage and the tragic execution of John the Baptist were documented as turning points that brought profound moral shame upon the Herodian dynasty. The cross-scriptural and historical consensus surrounding these figures paints an undeniable portrait. Zechariah was a solitary beacon of pure devotion who refused to let the light of the Abrahamic covenant be extinguished by the encroaching shadows of imperial vanity and spiritual corruption. For modern seekers and historians looking back across 2 millennia, the story of Zechariah offers a profound mirror to our own lives. We live in an era often defined by rapid noise, material distractions, and an underlying anxiety about the future, yet the ancient priest of Jerusalem speaks across the centuries about the power of sacred silence. His 3 days of imposed quietude were not a punishment, but a profound spiritual retreat, a reminder that before a soul can receive the magnitude of a miracle, it must first quiet the chaotic clamor of the world and learn to listen to the whisper of the divine. He taught us that when doors appear permanently locked, when our bodies fail us, and when society insists that our hopes are dead, the Creator who brings life to the barren and summer fruits to the winter cold is still listening, still creating, and still capable of turning our deepest despairs into monuments of eternal light. When we peel back the layers of antiquity and look at the geographical footprint left by Zechariah's lineage, the holy topography of the Levant still holds the quiet imprint of their journey. From the sun-bleached terraces of Ain Karim nestled in the Judean hills, traditionally remembered as the peaceful village where Zechariah lived with Elizabeth, tending his carpentry and welcoming the pregnant Maryam, to the bustling courtyards of the great Mosque of Damascus, where classical history honors the memory of Yahya. These physical spaces stand as monumental reminders that these were real human beings who walked this earth, felt the sting of sorrow, and bore the immense weight of prophetic responsibility. They were not abstract mythological figures lost in ancient fables. They were flesh and blood champions of righteousness who chose absolute integrity in an age that rewarded absolute compromise. In the analytical lens of classical historiography, the era of Prophet Zakariah marks one of the most crucial inflection points in human history, the direct bridge between the ancient Mosaic order and the birth of the Abrahamic traditions that would ultimately shape global civilization. During this turbulent century, the spiritual center of the world was shifting. The old priestly aristocracy, blinded by institutional greed and political survival, had grown deaf to the cries of the marginalized. Yet in the humble home of Zechariah, the true essence of spiritual stewardship was kept pristine. By nurturing Maryam under his personal care and raising Yahya with an unwavering commitment to ascetic truth, Zechariah served as the vital, quiet architect behind the very personalities who would introduce the message of mercy, redemption, and divine consciousness to billions of people across millennia. The profound lessons that continue to radiate from Zechariah's life provide a masterclass in human resilience, purpose, and unshakable conviction. He demonstrated that true patience is not passive resignation, but active, hopeful perseverance. He endured decades of barrenness without allowing cynicism to poison his character or weaken his service to his community. He proved that genuine spiritual leadership requires physical self-reliance and humility, choosing to sustain himself through honest labor as a craftsman rather than exploiting his priestly status for luxury. Most importantly, his life established that spiritual legacy transcends biological survival. When a person lives completely for the defense of truth, justice, and the upliftment of the human soul, their impact refuses to be buried in the earth, echoing through generations as a timeless guide for all who seek light in the midst of darkness. To fully grasp the magnitude of Zechariah's life and the world he inhabited, one must step directly into the complex sociological and theological landscape of the late Second Temple period, an era marked by intense political friction, apocalyptic expectation, and severe spiritual disenfranchisement. The children of Israel found themselves caught in a crushing vice between two ruthless forces: the external, iron-fisted imperial machinery of the Roman Empire, and the internal, deeply corrupt aristocracy of the Sadducean priesthood and the Herodian dynasty. Rome cared nothing for the sanctity of the Torah or the holiness of the sanctuary. To the governors residing in Caesarea Maritima, Judea was merely a volatile frontier province that needed to be pacified through punitive taxation, public crucifixions, and calculated political alliances with the local elite. The sacred office of the high priest, which had once been a lifelong, divinely ordained role passed down through the pure lineage of Aaron, had degenerated into a venal political commodity, bought and sold to the highest bidder by puppet kings like Herod the Great and confirmed by Roman prefects. In this spiritually suffocating atmosphere, the vast majority of ordinary people felt utterly abandoned by their institutional leadership. The grandiose expansion of the Temple Mount, undertaken by Herod to flatter his own monumental ego and placate the populace, did little to soothe the moral crisis. The glittering white marble and opulent gold leaf of the sanctuary stood as a hollow shell if the souls of those presiding within it were tainted by political bribery, compromise, and moral neglect. It was into this exact wilderness of hypocrisy that Zechariah was ordained to serve. As a descendant of the priestly division of Abijah, one of the 24 priestly courses established by King David to maintain perpetual service in the house of God, Zechariah did not belong to the wealthy, urban elite who dined in Herodian villas. He belonged to the rural, hard-working priesthood who traveled from their modest villages in the Judean hill country to Jerusalem only when their designated week of service arrived. When not ministering at the altar, he earned his sustenance through the sweat of his brow as a carpenter, shaping wood with the same meticulous patience with which he tended to the spiritual wounds of his community. The theological significance of Zechariah's role is magnified exponentially when examined through the lens of classical Quranic commentaries, hadith literature, and historical records preserved by early scholars such as Ibn Kathir, al-Tabari, and al-Qurtubi. These traditions emphasize that Zechariah was far more than an officiant of rituals. He was the bearer of the spiritual ark in an era when genuine divine revelation had become exceedingly rare among the people. The Quran immortalizes his character as one of the most sublime examples of pure monotheism, *Tawhid*, portraying a man whose entire inner life was an ongoing dialogue with his creator. When Zechariah witnessed the miraculous provisions granted to the young Maryam in her secluded chamber, fresh fruits out of their natural season, defying all agricultural and climatic laws, it was not merely an occasion of astonishment, but a profound catalyst for a theological epiphany. In classical tafsir, this moment is understood as the awakening of an absolute certainty, *yakin*, that the Almighty is completely independent of secondary causes, *asbab*. The Creator who commands the seasons to reverse their order inside a sanctuary can effortlessly command the dormant, aging biology of a 100-year-old man and his barren wife to bring forth a living prophet. This realization led directly to the immortal prayer recorded in Surah Maryam, a passage of unparalleled emotional and spiritual depth. Zechariah did not shout his plea in the crowded courts where men seek the praise of their peers. He retreated into the deepest sanctuary of his heart, calling upon his Lord with a hidden, whispered voice. In this intimate supplication, he laid bare his extreme human vulnerability, the weakness of his bones, the flaring of white hair across his head, and the lifelong barrenness of his beloved wife. Yet, despite his physical frailty, his prayer was devoid of despair. He explicitly stated that he had never been disappointed in his supplication to God. His primary concern was entirely altruistic and spiritual. He looked upon the horizon of Judea, saw the wolves waiting to lead the flock astray after his passing, and feared what would become of the divine covenant if the leadership fell into the hands of those who loved power more than righteousness. He asked for an heir not to inherit worldly goods, land, or titles, but to inherit the prophetic mantle of the house of Jacob. The heavenly response to this pure petition established a precedent that has comforted the brokenhearted for thousands of years. The archangel Gabriel brought the glad tidings of Yahya, a child whose very existence would be a living sign of divine power, endowed with wisdom while still a youth, uniquely preserved from sinful arrogance, and profoundly tender-hearted toward his parents and all of creation. The 3 days of divinely imposed silence granted to Zechariah served as a sacred incubation period, a profound lesson in spiritual discipline demonstrating that when the divine decree is in motion, human speech must cease, giving way entirely to contemplation, internal purification, and the ceaseless glorification of the Almighty. When Zechariah finally emerged from the sanctuary, communicating with his people through gestures and signs to instruct them to remember God in the morning and the evening, he demonstrated the ultimate posture of the servant, one who speaks only when commanded, and whose silence itself is a profound sermon to the community. The parallel accounts found in the Gospel of Luke and early Christian historiography harmonized powerfully with this narrative, depicting Zechariah as a man walking blamelessly in all the commandments and ordinances of the Lord. His prophetic song, preserved across millennia, celebrated the breaking of a new dawn upon humanity, the fulfillment of the ancient covenant made with Abraham, and the arrival of a salvation that would deliver people from the hands of their oppressors, so they might serve God without fear in holiness and righteousness all their days. The convergence of these sacred texts paints an undeniable historical and spiritual portrait. Zechariah stood as the vital bridge between the ancient world of the prophets and the dramatic arrival of the Messianic era. Without his unwavering preservation of the sacred flame, without his meticulous guardianship of Maryam, and without the moral fire ignited by his son Yahya, the historical path for the transformative ministry of Jesus of Nazareth would not have been prepared. The tragic culmination of Zechariah's life, culminating in his pursuit and horrific martyrdom at the hands of the very religious and political establishment he sought to guide, serves as a stark historical warning against the perils of institutional corruption and spiritual blindness. Throughout history, societies that reject, silence, and destroy their moral consciences inevitably pave the way for their own catastrophic ruin. When the corrupt rulers of Jerusalem cut down the righteous patriarch Zechariah and beheaded the fearless prophet Yahya, they believed they were securing their political dominance and silencing their critics forever. Instead, they unsealed the judgment of history upon their own heads. Within a single generation, the Roman armies they had sought to appease turned upon them with absolute fury, laying waste to the city, burning the Herodian temple to the ground, and scattering the corrupted hierarchy into the winds of oblivion. The stone structures they prioritized over divine justice were pulverized into dust, while the names of Zechariah and Yahya rose to the heavens, preserved in eternal honor across billions of hearts in every corner of the globe. For the modern seeker, the life of Prophet Zakariah offers profound, transformative lessons that remain urgently relevant in an increasingly chaotic, noisy, and materialistic world. First, it teaches the supreme power of silent, unyielding patience in the face of long-term adversity. In an age that demands instant gratification, Zechariah's decades of quiet service in the face of barrenness and societal judgment remind us that divine delays are never divine denials, but rather the quiet preparation for a far greater miracle. Second, it demonstrates the necessity of personal integrity and self-reliance in leadership. Zechariah was a craftsman who worked with his hands, proving that true dignity comes from honest labor and spiritual purity, not from political titles, material wealth, or the flattery of crowds. Finally, his life stands as an eternal monument to the transformative power of sincere prayer. He proved that when a human soul strips away all pretense, acknowledges its own utter helplessness, and turns to the Creator with absolute trust, the established laws of nature bend, the impossible becomes reality, and a single light kindled in the dark can illuminate the path of humanity for thousands of years to come. To fully appreciate the timeless resonance of Prophet Zakariah's life, one must examine the profound psychological, ethical, and spiritual dimensions of his journey through the crucible of extreme human trial. Throughout the extensive narratives recorded in classical Islamic theology, biblical traditions, and ancient historiography, Zechariah represents the quintessential archetype of the righteous individual standing entirely alone against an ocean of societal degeneration. In an era when religious devotion had largely been reduced to external performance, ritualistic vanity, and political transactionalism, his internal life remained an unblemished sanctuary of absolute sincerity. His existence provides a vital blueprint for how a servant of truth must navigate an environment where truth itself is viewed as a subversive threat to the established order. The dynamic between Zechariah and his ward, Maryam, offers one of the most compelling pedagogical models in sacred history. When Zechariah assumed the guardianship of the orphaned daughter of Imran, he was not merely fulfilling a legal or customary obligation. He was consciously investing in the spiritual preservation of the divine covenant. Within the secluded chamber of the temple, he did not treat Maryam with patriarchal condescension, nor did he impose rigid authoritarian control over her spiritual life. Instead, he approached her with deep reverence, recognizing the immense spiritual potential within her soul. When he witnessed the out-of-season fruits and supernatural provisions appearing in her sanctuary, his immediate reaction was not envy, skepticism, or fear of being eclipsed. Rather, his heart expanded in profound awe, and he allowed the purity of her faith to rekindle the embers of his own deepest, unspoken longing. This interaction exemplifies the highest form of spiritual mentorship, a dynamic where the teacher remains forever humble enough to learn from the student, recognizing that divine grace flows wherever the heart is pure, entirely unconstrained by age or gender. The spiritual anatomy of Zechariah's supplication in the aftermath of that realization remains one of the greatest masterpieces of prayer ever recorded in human language. In classical Islamic metaphysics, the concept of dua, supplication, is not merely a mechanism for requesting material boons. It is the ultimate expression of human servitude, *ubudiyya*, and the conscious acknowledgement of one's complete dependence upon the Absolute. When Zechariah raised his hands in the secret depths of the night, every word he spoke was stripped of self-importance. He openly articulated his physical decay, his brittle bones, his graying hair, the biological impossibility facing him and his barren wife, not as a complaint against his destiny, but as a deliberate confession of human limitation before infinite divine capability. He understood that genuine spiritual breakthroughs occur precisely at the point where human self-sufficiency completely shatters. By placing his utter weakness before the boundless power of the Creator, he opened a channel for the miraculous to enter the physical realm. Furthermore, the nature of what Zechariah requested reveals the profound altruism that defined his entire existence. In the ancient world, sons were sought primarily for economic security, clan dominance, physical protection, and the perpetuation of the family name in the earthly register. Zechariah discarded every one of these mundane motives. His entire prayer was animated by a single, burning anxiety. Who will protect the sacred trust of monotheism when my eyes are closed in death? Who will stand between the ravenous political wolves and the spiritually vulnerable flock of the children of Israel? He asked for an heir who would inherit the mantle of spiritual insight, ethical fortitude, and moral clarity from the house of Jacob. In doing so, he taught future generations that a person's true legacy is not measured by the wealth they accumulate, the monuments they build, or the earthly empires they establish, but by the moral and spiritual health of the generation they leave behind. The divinely mandated silence imposed upon Zechariah following the angel's announcement carries profound psychological and contemplative wisdom. In a world saturated with relentless political rhetoric, theological debates, and superficial chatter, the divine order commanded the prophet to hold his tongue for 3 days and nights. This silence was not a punishment for seeking a confirming sign. It was a profound spiritual discipline designed to align his inner faculties with the immense reality of the miracle about to unfold. By silencing the tongue, the mind is forced to quiet its anxieties. The ego is starved of its need to explain or justify itself, and the soul is elevated into a state of continuous, uninterrupted contemplation of the divine majesty. When Zechariah communicated with his community solely through gestures, directing them to engage in the glorification of God at dawn and dusk, he demonstrated that the most powerful form of leadership is that which redirects all human attention away from the mortal messenger and squarely toward the immortal Creator. The subsequent upbringing of Yahya and the tragic culmination of their prophetic mission highlight the inescapable friction between divine justice and tyrannical power. Yahya was not nurtured in the soft luxuries of the palace or the protected enclaves of the religious elite. He was forged in the rugged, ascetic wilderness, learning to master his desires and fear nothing save God. When the time came to confront the moral corruption of King Herod Antipas and the compromised establishment of Jerusalem, neither father nor son hesitated to speak the truth, fully cognizant of the mortal danger that surrounded them. They understood that the ultimate failure in human life is not physical death, but the cowardly betrayal of one's conscience. The gruesome martyrdoms that closed their earthly lives, the venerable patriarch Zechariah pursued by an armed mob and meeting his end with divine praise upon his lips, and his son Yahya beheaded in the desolate fortress of Machaerus to satisfy the dark vanity of an incestuous royal court served as an unyielding mirror held up to human history. These tragedies demonstrate that the triumph of righteousness is rarely measured in the fleeting currency of political victory or physical survival. The tyrants who ordered their deaths, the executioners who wielded the steel, and the corrupt priests who plotted in the shadows were all rapidly swept into the dustbin of history, their names forever stained with dishonor, their palaces reduced to rubble, and their temporary power swallowed by the sands of time. In stark contrast, the names of Zechariah and Yahya remain indelibly inscribed upon the collective conscience of humanity, revered by billions across diverse faiths and cultures as the supreme exemplars of faith, courage, and unconditional trust in God. Their lives deliver an eternal message to every individual navigating seasons of hardship, barrenness, societal corruption, or personal despair. No darkness is absolute. No prayer uttered from a sincere heart is ever lost, and no sacrifice made in the defense of truth is ever in vain. Even when the entire world appears to be collapsing into chaos, a solitary soul grounded in faith remains unconquerable, shining as a perpetual beacon of hope across the boundless corridors of human history. The enduring power of Prophet Zakariya's life rests not only in his dramatic historical trials, but in the profound philosophical and existential questions his story forces every thinking human being to confront. Across the vast tapestry of ancient history, human beings have constantly struggled with the tension between visible earthly power and invisible spiritual reality. When one stood in first-century Jerusalem, all observable evidence suggested that Caesar Augustus, Herod the Great, and the heavily armed Roman garrisons were the absolute masters of the universe. They commanded armies, levied crushing taxes, built colossal aqueducts and amphitheaters, and dictated the life and death of millions with the stroke of a stylus. By contrast, an elderly, impoverished priest quietly carving wood in a modest workshop or bowing in the dim light of an incense-filled sanctuary appeared utterly powerless, inconsequential, and fragile. Yet the lens of history completely reverses this superficial perception. The grand imperial machinery of Rome, with all its armored legions, golden eagles, and administrative genius, has long since crumbled into fractured ruins, studied by archaeologists and preserved in museum glass. The corrupt religious politicians who sold their integrity for Roman favor are remembered only with profound historical disdain. But the whisper of Zechariah uttered in absolute privacy, devoid of political influence or material leverage, proved to be more durable and impactful than all the decrees of the Roman Senate combined. His prayer cracked open the ceiling of physical impossibility, brought forth the forerunner of the Messianic era, and set in motion the spiritual currents that continue to guide billions of human lives across the globe. This reality delivers a devastating critique of purely materialistic worldviews, proving that the deepest, most permanent forces shaping human destiny are not military might or financial capital, but moral integrity, spiritual conviction, and unyielding faith in the unseen. When we examine the theological synthesis of Zechariah's legacy across the Abrahamic traditions, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, we discover a remarkable convergence of veneration. In the Islamic tradition, The Quranic discourse elevates Zechariah as a paragon of constant remembrance, highlighting how his life exemplified the balance between sabr, patient endurance, and shukr, deep gratitude. Islamic scholarship, from the profound philosophical treatises of Al-Ghazali to the historical compilations of Ibn Kathir, frequently points to Zechariah's supplication as the supreme evidence that human despair is a spiritual sickness born of a limited understanding of God's absolute sovereignty. In the Christian tradition, preserved through the liturgical heritage and the early chapters of the Gospel of Luke, Zechariah is revered as the prophet who bridged the long silence between the Old Testament prophets and the dawn of the Christian era, singing a canticle of praise that celebrated divine mercy, visiting a world trapped in the shadow of death. In classical Jewish historiography, the martyrdom of the righteous priests and the fierce moral stand of his son John against Herodian corruption are preserved by chroniclers like Josephus as monumental historical events that define the tragic spiritual fracture of Judea. This cross-traditional reverence highlights a universal truth: genuine sanctity transcends cultural, political, and temporal boundaries. Zechariah did not belong merely to a single tribe, faction, or historical moment. He belongs to the universal lineage of truth-tellers who remind humanity of its transcendent origin and destiny. His life serves as a perennial warning against the subtle, dangerous creep of cynicism. It is extraordinarily easy for human beings, when confronted with decades of unfulfilled hopes, physical decline, or widespread societal corruption, to become bitter, detached, and resigned to hopelessness. Zechariah lived through 9 decades of deep personal trial, bearing the painful societal stigma of childlessness, while watching his nation's holy traditions get desecrated by foreign oppressors and domestic sellouts. Yet his heart remained utterly tender, full of wonder, and vibrantly alive with hope until his very last breath. The lessons derived from his guardianship of Maryam and his upbringing of Yahya also provide a timeless paradigm for ethical mentorship and family dynamics. Zechariah demonstrated that a true guardian does not seek to clone themselves in their children or students, but rather cultivates an environment where the divine light unique to each soul can fully blossom. He gave Maryam the sacred sanctuary and spiritual freedom to develop an unprecedented relationship with her Creator, learning from her purity rather than feeling threatened by it. With Yahya, he did not prepare him for the comfortable life of a pampered temple bureaucrat. He instilled within him the fierce independence, moral courage, and ascetic discipline necessary to stand up against kings and tyrants. Through these 2 monumental figures, Zechariah effectively shaped the entire ethical landscape of the coming era. As the story of Zechariah echoes down the corridors of 2,000 years, it addresses the modern human condition with relentless precision. In our contemporary world, frequently characterized by intense speed, overwhelming sensory noise, superficial metrics of success, and profound existential anxiety, Zechariah's life stands as a sanctuary of calm, enduring wisdom. He calls us to rediscover the transformative power of silence, reminding us that constant noise numbs the spirit, while intentional quietude opens the ears of the heart. He challenges us to measure our lives not by the praise of fickle crowds or the accumulation of perishable wealth, but by the purity of our motives and the resilience of our principles when nobody is watching. Most of all, his life stands as an eternal monument to the reality that no situation is ever truly hopeless, no soul is ever truly abandoned, and a single, sincere prayer uttered in the dark can ignite a light that burns brightly across the ages. The enduring memory of Prophet Zakariya invites a deeper examination of the nature of spiritual legacy and historical memory. When we look at the ruins of the ancient world, humanity often measures civilizations by their physical relics. The colossal arches of Titus, the fortified walls of Masada, the stone foundations of the Herodian palaces, and the paved roads built for Roman marching boots. Yet the historical narrative surrounding Zechariah offers a completely inverted criterion for human significance. Stone decays, monuments are ground into powder by the relentless wheel of time, and the names of violent conquerors are preserved primarily as warnings of tyranny. The spiritual architecture built by Zechariah, constructed out of silent devotion, fatherly sacrifice, uncompromising integrity, and a desperate love for divine truth, proved to be completely impervious to physical destruction. In the analytical tradition of Islamic civilization, scholars of Quranic exegesis have consistently drawn attention to the precise language used in the opening of Surah Maryam, the mention of the mercy of your Lord to his servant Zechariah. Classical exegetes emphasize the title of servant *abd* as the highest station a human being can attain. In an empire where every man sought to be a master, a commander, a patron, or a king, Zechariah found his supreme dignity in being an absolute servant of the Almighty. This servitude freed him from the crippling anxieties that dominate worldly ambitions. He did not fear the displeasure of King Herod. He did not seek the approval of the Sanhedrin, and he did not despair when the natural order of biology pronounced his lineage dead. His total reliance on the Creator, *tawakkul*, gave him a transcendent freedom that neither Roman legions nor corrupt temple guards could ever strip away. This transcendent freedom was the ultimate inheritance he passed down to Yahya. When we study the life of Yahya in conjunction with his father, we observe a seamless continuity of spiritual ethos. Yahya did not need to invent a new doctrine or construct an elaborate political philosophy to confront the degeneration of his era. He simply embodied the raw, unadulterated essence of his father's teachings, stripped of institutional hypocrisy and societal complacency. Where Zechariah served quietly within the temple, speaking through humble carpentry and whispered supplications, Yahya took that same fire into the wilderness, his voice echoing across the limestone valleys of the Jordan River. Both men, in their distinct callings, lived entirely for a singular purpose: to bear witness to the light of truth before a world desperate for redemption. The violent end met by both father and son also forces a profound reckoning with the concept of justice in human history. To a superficial observer, the martyrdom of Zechariah and the execution of Yahya might appear as devastating tragedies, catastrophic defeats where evil triumphed over righteousness. Yet across the grand scope of sacred history, martyrdom is understood not as an erasure, but as the ultimate victory of the soul over mortal tyranny. By refusing to compromise, by willingly laying down their lives rather than validating the corrupt desires of earthly rulers, Zechariah and Yahya demonstrated that truth cannot be bought, silenced, or intimidated. Their blood became an eternal testament against the illegitimacy of their oppressors, rendering the short-lived triumphs of Herod and the corrupt priests entirely hollow. For generations of believers, thinkers, and seekers, the life of Prophet Zakariya remains a continuous source of spiritual revitalization. His story speaks directly to the individual experiencing private barrenness, whether that barrenness is physical, emotional, creative, or spiritual. He stands as an eternal witness that the winter of human helplessness is often the exact threshold where the spring of divine mercy begins. He reminds us that true prayer is not a demand for divine intervention on our own narrow terms, but an act of radical surrender that places our frailties before infinite capability with absolute, childlike trust. As the dust of centuries settles over the Judean hills and the grand empires of antiquity fade into the quiet annals of memory, the story of Zechariah shines with an unblemished, eternal brilliance. It cuts through the superficial noise of human vanity, calling every wandering soul back to what is real, what is pure, and what is permanent. Through his patience, his devotion, his sacred silence, and his ultimate sacrifice, Prophet Zakariya proved that a life anchored in the divine cannot be conquered by time, circumstance, or the sword, remaining an immortal beacon of light across the vast and winding tapestry of human history. When we reflect upon the grand tapestry of prophetic history, the story of Zakariya offers an indispensable masterclass in the delicate art of maintaining spiritual sovereignty while living under systemic oppression. In first-century Judea, every facet of daily existence was dictated by foreign conquest, cultural assimilation, and economic exploitation. The Roman tax collectors squeezed the lifeblood out of the agrarian villages. The imperial governors demanded absolute submission to the cult of the emperor, and the Hellenistic culture rapidly eroded the ancient, sacred traditions of the community. In such an overwhelming environment, the average person naturally succumbed to one of two extreme reactions: either violent, blind rebellion driven by political rage, or complete, cowardly capitulation to the status quo for the sake of survival and comfort. Zakariya walked a completely different path, the path of prophetic transcendence. He neither compromised the eternal principles of the divine law to appease the Roman prefects nor weaponized religion as a cheap political tool for personal rebellion. Instead, he built an unshakable citadel within his own soul. His resistance was not fought with rusted swords or opportunistic alliances in smoke-filled council chambers. It was waged in the silent sanctuary of the dawn, in the precision of his craftsmanship as a carpenter, and in his unyielding commitment to the moral education of his community. He demonstrated that the most dangerous threat to an oppressive system is not an armed militia, but a righteous, incorruptible human being who cannot be bought with gold, silenced by threats, or distracted by the fleeting luxuries of the royal court. This profound spiritual poise is what made Zakariya the ideal guardian for Maryam during one of the most critical transitions in human history. Had Maryam been placed in the care of the politically compromised priests of the Sadducean faction, her spiritual purity would have been suffocated under the weight of political maneuvering, institutional cynicism, and ritualistic vanity. Under Zakariya's protective wing, however, she was shielded from the toxic cynicism of the era. He provided her with a physical and spiritual sanctuary where her soul could commune directly with the divine, untainted by the corrupting influences of the world outside. The quiet, disciplined atmosphere of the temple chamber, combined with Zakariya's paternal tenderness and unwavering faith, created the fertile soil in which the mother of the Messiah could grow into the purest woman of creation. The deep intergenerational link between Zakariya, Maryam, Yahya, and Isa illustrates the profound concept of divine preparation. God does not manifest great historical transformations in a vacuum. He lays the foundations through generations of quiet, patient, and steadfast servants whose names may never be inscribed on monumental Roman arches, but whose sacrifices shape the moral destiny of the world. Zakariya was the anchor of this sacred chain. Without his decades of patient endurance, without his fierce guardianship over Maryam, and without his sincere supplication for a righteous heir who would stand as a moral vanguard, the spiritual landscape that welcomed Jesus of Nazareth would have been barren, dry, and unprepared. The tragic martyrdom of Zakariya also presents a profound theological reflection on the nature of suffering and sacrifice in the path of truth. Why would the Almighty permit one of his most beloved, gentle, and elderly prophets to be brutally pursued and cut down by the very people he spent his life serving? The classical scholars and sages of sacred history answer that the ultimate worth of a prophetic life is not measured by earthly comfort, long retirement, or worldly triumph, but by the perfection of their testament. Shahada*. Zakariya's death was the ultimate sealing of his life's work. By remaining steadfast even when the saw tore through the wood that sheltered him, he proved that his devotion to God was not contingent on safety, ease, or earthly reward. He entered the presence of his Lord with the unblemished honor of a warrior of the Spirit, leaving behind a legacy that no amount of Roman steel or priestly betrayal could ever diminish. In our modern world, where the pressures of conformity, materialism, and moral compromise are as fierce as they were under the shadow of the Roman eagles, the life of Prophet Zakariya shines with an urgent, blazing clarity. He stands as a towering example for every parent striving to raise righteous children in a corrupt culture, for every seeker enduring long seasons of barrenness and unanswered prayers, and for every individual who feels small, helpless, and isolated against the towering injustices of the age. He reminds us that the quietest prayers can shake the heavens, that physical limitations can never bind divine mercy, and that a single heart beating with authentic, unshakable faith is more powerful than all the empires of the earth combined. The ultimate culmination of Prophet Zakariya's legacy demands that we examine the profound philosophical and historical aftermath that swept through the Levant following his physical departure from the mortal realm. To truly measure the weight of an individual's existence, one must look at what happens when the dust settles, when the immediate political actors who executed them have vanished from the stage, and when the collective memory of humanity begins to sift the transient noise of an era from its eternal substance. In the immediate wake of Zakariya's gruesome martyrdom and the subsequent execution of his son Yahya, the political landscape of Jerusalem appeared, to the naked eye, entirely unchanged. Herod Antipas continued to sit upon his tetrarchic throne, surrounding himself with sycophants, Hellenized courtiers, and Roman liaisons. The high-ranking Sadducean priests continued to walk the grand colonnades of the temple in their fine linens, offering formal sacrifices, collecting tithes, and managing their intricate political relationships with the Roman prefecture. Yet beneath this outward appearance of continuity and power, a profound, irreversible spiritual rot had consumed the entire infrastructure of Judean leadership. The execution of Zechariah and Yahya was the definitive moral watershed. When a society crosses the catastrophic threshold of hunting down, sawing through, and beheading its most blameless, compassionate, and spiritually luminous elders to satisfy the fleeting lusts, fragile egos, and political anxieties of a despotic dynasty, that society has signed its own historical death warrant. The divine protection and moral legitimacy that had once hovered over the institutions of Jerusalem were entirely withdrawn. The temple, which had stood for centuries as the physical focal point of Abrahamic worship and the theater of Zechariah's miraculous supplications, had been hollowed out from the inside. It remained a spectacular architectural wonder of polished white marble and glittering gold leaf, but its inner sanctuary had lost its spiritual vitality, awaiting the inevitable arrival of historical retribution. That retribution did not delay in the grand scale of prophetic time. Within 4 decades of Zechariah's death, the political fragility of the region completely collapsed into catastrophic chaos. The very Roman power that the compromised priestly aristocracy had desperately appeased by betraying their own prophets turned against them with unprecedented ferocity. The Roman general Titus surrounded Jerusalem in 70 CE with 4 battle-hardened legions, subjecting the holy city to a siege of horrific proportions. The internecine civil strife, starvation, and desperation that consumed the city during those harrowing months served as the tragic materialization of the spiritual blindness Zechariah had spent his entire life warning against. When the Roman siege engines finally breached the walls, the temple was completely consumed by an inferno of fire and iron. The massive stones that Zechariah had walked past for nearly a century were pried apart and thrown down into the surrounding valleys, until literally not one stone was left standing upon another. The ancient priestly aristocracy was entirely dissolved, their records burned, and their lineage scattered into the diaspora, while the royal palaces of the Herodians were leveled into ash. In stark and glorious contrast, Look at what happened to the memory, the name, and the spiritual lineage of the carpenter from the hill country of Judea. While the names of the Roman prefects, the puppet kings, and the corrupt high priests became synonymous with treachery, tyranny, and moral failure, the name of Zechariah was elevated to the highest heavens. When the final revelation of the Quran was sent down to Prophet Muhammad 6 centuries later in the desert of Arabia, the Almighty did not preserve the memory of the Roman Caesars or the opulent architecture of Herod's court. He preserved the tender, trembling, whispered prayer of an impoverished, white-haired old man who called upon his Lord from the depths of an aching, sincere heart. The Quranic narrative immortalized Zechariah's story in Surah Maryam and Surah Al-Imran, turning his life, his patience, his guardianship over the mother of Jesus, and his unshakable trust in the impossible into an eternal source of solace, contemplation, and inspiration for billions of human beings across every continent on Earth. This extraordinary divergence between the fate of earthly tyrants and the fate of divine servants reveals the most fundamental law of human existence: that true power does not reside in physical force, institutional authority, material wealth, or political coercion. True power resides exclusively in alignment with absolute truth, moral integrity, and divine purpose. The tyrants who pursued Zechariah into the ancient grove and brought the saw to the hollowed tree believed that they were destroying an enemy. In reality, they were merely releasing a soul into immortal honor while cementing their own eternal infamy. Zechariah's blood did not cry out for worldly vengeance. It stood as an unshakable, eternal witness against the bankrupt illusions of this temporary world. He proved that a human being who has conquered their own ego, who seeks nothing of this world's fleeting applause, and who places their absolute reliance upon the Creator can endure the worst atrocities that human cruelty can invent without ever suffering true defeat. The legacy of Zechariah also provides the ultimate resolution to the age-old problem of human suffering and deferred hope. In every generation, countless millions of people find themselves trapped in circumstances that seem utterly impossible to overcome. They battle chronic illnesses that defy medical solutions. They endure the agonizing grief of childlessness in cultures that judge their worth by biological offspring. They labor under oppressive economic systems that crush their dignity, and they watch moral corruption flourish while righteousness is ridiculed and marginalized. To every such weary, broken, and searching soul, Prophet Zakariya stands as an eternal beacon of light piercing through the absolute darkness. He whispers across the span of 2,000 years that God is never late, that divine timing is always infinitely wiser than human urgency, and that the silence of heaven is not the absence of love, but the deep, quiet preparation of a miracle beyond human comprehension. He reminds us that before the barren womb could bring forth Yahya, Zechariah had to endure decades of patient waiting without allowing a single drop of bitterness to enter his heart. He teaches us that before the impossible can be granted, the soul must first reach a state of pure, unconditional vulnerability, stripping away every illusion of self-sufficiency and laying its weakness completely bare before the Absolute. His 3 days of sacred silence instruct us that when the world becomes overwhelmingly chaotic, noisy, and hostile, the greatest weapon of the righteous is not reactionary shouting or political panic, but deep, intentional quietude, internal purification, and continuous, rhythmic remembrance of the divine. As we close the monumental chronicle of this great prophet, we are left with the indelible portrait of a man who bridged 2 worlds, the ancient covenant of the patriarchs and the dawning light of the Messianic era. Prophet Zakariya lived as a humble craftsman, walked as a holy priest, guarded the purest woman in human history, fathered the fearless herald of truth, and died as an unblemished martyr for the cause of righteousness. He was a man who asked for nothing of this world, and in return, The heavens gave him everything, immortalizing his whispered prayer as an eternal sanctuary of hope for every wandering traveler walking the earth until the end of time. To fully grasp the universal scale of Prophet Zakariya's legacy, one must examine how his story transcends the physical borders of ancient Judea and roots itself into the spiritual consciousness of global literature, theological philosophy, and interfaith understanding. In classical Islamic historiography, particularly in the monumental works of chroniclers like al-Masudi, Ibn al-Athir, and al-Dhalabi, the narrative of Zakariya is treated not merely as an isolated biographical episode, but as a foundational pillar of prophetic phenomenology. These historians recognize that Zakariya embodied the supreme synthesis of three distinct stations: the station of the righteous worker, *al-Kasib*, the station of the holy guardian, *al-Kafil*, and the station of the ultimate martyr, *ash-Shahid*. By holding these three stations simultaneously, Zakariya's life demolished the false dichotomy between worldly responsibility and ascetic spiritual elevation, proving that true sainthood is forged directly within the messy, demanding realities of everyday human existence. Consider the profound socio-economic statement embedded in Zakariya's identity as a carpenter. In the stratified Greco-Roman world of the 1st century, manual labor was deeply despised by the aristocratic and intellectual elites. Roman patricians and Hellenized philosophers viewed physical toil with hands and iron tools as the degraded occupation of slaves and lower-class plebeians, unworthy of a refined mind. Even within the sectarian divisions of Judea, the high priestly families of the Sadducean faction lived in opulent urban palaces adorned with imported Italian mosaics, looking down with aristocratic condescension upon the rural agrarian laborers. Zakariya shattered this toxic hierarchy. Despite carrying the highest spiritual authority and the purest lineage descending directly from Aaron, he woke every morning to cut cedar, plane timber, and shape wood with his own calloused hands. Through his honest labor as a craftsman, Zakariya established an enduring prophetic tradition that a servant of God must never convert their sacred knowledge, spiritual authority, or priestly lineage into a commercial enterprise for personal enrichment. In Islamic theology, this principle is deeply revered through the Hadith literature, where Prophet Muhammad explicitly praised Zakariya for earning his livelihood as a carpenter. By refusing to accept stipends of political compromise or exploit the religious devotion of the common people for financial gain, Zakariya preserved an unassailable moral independence. When a man relies solely on the labor of his hands and the sustenance provided by the Creator, he cannot be blackmailed by tyrants, silenced by corrupt donors, or bought by royal palaces. His carpentry was not merely a trade. It was the impenetrable fortress of his spiritual freedom. This fierce independence allowed Zakariya to act as the incorruptible guardian of Maryam during a period when the temple precincts were drowning in institutional vanity. In classical Quranic exegesis, *tafsir*, the debate among the priests over who would foster Maryam settled miraculously by the reed pens cast into the rushing Jordan River is understood as a critical moment of divine intervention to rescue the mother of Jesus from the toxic environment of sectarian politics. Had Maryam been raised by the ambitious, politically entangled priests who sought her guardianship for personal status and prestige, the pure environment necessary for the conception and upbringing of the Messiah would have been compromised. Zakariya built for her a physical and spiritual sanctuary, an elevated chamber, *Mirab*, where the air was thick with the scent of unadulterated devotion, free from the gossip of the courtyards and the intrigues of the council halls. The profound dialogue that occurred between Zakariya and Maryam regarding the supernatural fruits is analyzed by mystical scholars, including Jalal al-Din Rumi and Ibn Arabi, as one of the most sublime illustrations of divine wisdom, *Hikmah*. In their philosophical commentaries, they point out that Maryam's quiet declaration that God provides sustenance to whomever he wills without measure served as a mirror that reflected back to Zechariah the ultimate reality of divine omnipotence. Zechariah was not ignorant of God's power. He was a prophet who had studied the Torah and the histories of the ancient patriarchs. However, witnessing the living manifestation of that power in the daily life of a consecrated young girl transformed his intellectual knowledge, into direct, experiential certainty, It dissolved the invisible boundaries of human logic that had previously whispered that his biological age and his wife's barrenness were insurmountable barriers. This leads directly into the profound metaphysical reality of Zechariah's supplication. When Zechariah whispered his prayer in the secrecy of the sanctuary, he performed an act of complete ontological surrender. In the view of Islamic philosophers, human beings often suffer because they place their trust in intermediate causes, asbab*, rather than the originator of causes, musabib al-asbab*. They believe that medicine cures, that money secures, that youth produces life, and that old age brings sterility. While these natural laws operate consistently within the mundane realm, they are not sovereign entities. They are merely the habitual patterns through which the Creator manifests His will. When Zechariah laid bare his brittle bones and frost-white hair before God, he stepped outside the illusion of secondary causes, addressing the Absolute directly. His prayer was a radical affirmation that life does not emerge from biology alone, but from the unconstrained, creative command of the divine. Be, and it is. The birth, mission, and ultimate sacrifice of his son Yahya were the direct harvest of that unyielding faith. Yahya was not given to Zechariah merely to comfort his old age, but to serve as a living standard of uncompromising truth against the absolute moral corruption of his era. When Yahya confronted Herod Antipas, he did not do so out of reckless defiance or political ambition. He did so because he was the son of Zechariah. He had breathed the atmosphere of pure devotion from his infancy, watched his father labor humbly as a carpenter, and absorbed the ancient, uncompromised covenant of the prophets. When the blade fell upon Yahya's neck in the gloomy dungeons of Machaerus, and when the saw ripped through the hollowed wood containing Zechariah, the world witnessed the absolute collision between the kingdom of worldly vanity and the kingdom of divine reality. The tragic violence that claimed the lives of both father and son also delivers an eternal philosophical answer to the problem of apparent injustice in human history. To the cynical observer, the horrific murder of two blameless prophets seems to suggest that evil possesses the final word in this world. Yet the long arc of sacred history utterly demolishes this misconception. The Roman Empire that authorized these injustices eventually crumbled into fragmented ruins, its gods forgotten, and its mighty legions reduced to historical footnotes. The Herodian dynasty that bathed in luxury and murdered the righteous was wiped out, leaving behind a legacy of universal contempt. The corrupt high priests who sold their sacred heritage were obliterated alongside the very temple stones they worshipped over righteousness. Meanwhile, the names of Zechariah and Yahya rose into the eternal heavens. Their memory became an indelible, sacred heritage shared across global civilizations, revered by more than 2 billion Muslims and 2 billion Christians across every continent on the planet. Every time a believer recites the opening verses of Surah Maryam, every time a reader studies the gospel narratives of Luke, and every time a seeker of truth contemplates the cost of moral integrity, the spirit of Prophet Zakariya speaks directly to the human heart. His life stands as an eternal witness that no season of barrenness is permanent, no honest prayer uttered in the shadows goes unheard, and no human being who anchors their soul in the unshakable truth of God can ever be truly conquered by the fleeting tyrannies of this world. When we explore the psychological and existential depths of Prophet Zakariya's legacy, we encounter a profound study of human endurance under conditions of severe spiritual isolation. Throughout the ancient annals of Judea, there were countless figures who claimed religious authority, but almost none who possessed the inner purity required to stand as an incorruptible conduit of the divine will. The tragedy of human civilization has rarely been a lack of religious rhetoric or institutional grandeur. Rather, it has almost always been the slow, agonizing decay of personal authenticity within the hearts of those who claim to speak on behalf of heaven. Zechariah stood at the exact epicenter of such an epical crisis. Every stone of the Second Temple gleamed with the polished veneer of piety, yet the spiritual core was rapidly turning to ash. In this barren landscape, Zechariah's life served as a solitary, burning lamp, demonstrating that true faith does not depend upon the spiritual temperature of the crowd, but upon the uncompromising integrity of the individual soul before its creator. This unwavering integrity is illustrated with extraordinary clarity in the classical accounts of his domestic life and his long walk alongside his wife, Elizabeth. In the ancient world, the inability to bear children was an all-consuming social and emotional catastrophe, particularly for a priest whose lineage was expected to carry forward the sacred service of the sanctuary. Society in first-century Palestine was structured rigidly around family lines, tribal inheritance, and ancestral continuity. To reach the winter of life without an heir meant enduring not only the personal sorrow of an empty home, but also the cruel, sanctimonious whispers of a culture that frequently interpreted barrenness as a sign of hidden sin or divine disfavor. Yet, throughout the extensive narratives preserved in tafsir literature and early historical chronicles, there is not a single trace of resentment, bitterness, or discord between Zechariah and his wife. Their household was an oasis of mutual reverence, deep patience, and shared devotion. They did not allow the cold judgments of their contemporaries to poison the sanctity of their companionship. Zechariah never cast his wife aside, nor did he treat her with the subtle cruelty of passive disappointment. Instead, they walked through the decades together, their shared grief transformed into a profound spiritual alchemy that drew them closer to God. They understood that human worth is not determined by societal metrics of success, fertility, or social prestige, but by the sincerity with which one accepts the divine decree while continuing to pour out mercy upon others. This aspect of Zechariah's life provides an enduring lesson for human relationships in every era. That true love and righteous partnership are forged in the quiet endurance of shared trials, where patience, sabr, and gratitude, shukr, become the unbreakable foundation of the home. The profound lessons of Zechariah's life expand even further when we examine the precise pedagogical methods he utilized during his guardianship of Maryam. When Zechariah assumed the responsibility of raising this consecrated young girl, he was entering uncharted spiritual territory. The temple hierarchy was dominated entirely by men who guarded their authority with fierce jealousy, viewing the inner sanctum as their exclusive domain. By establishing Maryam in a dedicated, elevated chamber within the sanctuary precincts, Zechariah broke through the suffocating patriarchal prejudices of his era. He recognized that spiritual station is not a function of gender, social standing, or worldly power, but of the purity and receptivity of the human heart. He did not treat Maryam as a passive subordinate, but as a consecrated soul of the highest order. He ensured her physical safety, protected her from the toxic cynicism and political intrigues of the temple courts, and provided an environment where her communion with the divine could flourish without distraction. When he observed the out-of-season fruits and supernatural provisions resting in her chamber, his reaction was a masterclass in spiritual humility. A lesser man, bloated with priestly ego and decades of seniority, might have felt threatened, jealous, or resentful that a young girl under his care was receiving divine favors that bypassed his own hands. Zechariah, however, possessed a soul entirely purified of spiritual envy. ****. He celebrated her spiritual elevation with pure joy, allowing the miracle manifest in her life to reignite the deepest, most impossible longing of his own heart. This profound dynamic demonstrates the highest ideal of spiritual mentorship and parenthood. A true guide does not seek to dominate, control, or overshadow those under their care, but rather delights in their spiritual elevation, recognizing that divine grace flows freely to whomever the Creator chooses. Zechariah understood that the ultimate objective of a teacher is to guide the student directly to the threshold of the divine, and then humbly step aside so that the soul may converse directly with its Lord. In doing so, he became not merely Maryam's guardian in a physical sense, but the gentle protector of the very crucible in which the mother of Jesus was prepared to bear the word of God into the world. The metaphysical implications of the miracle that followed the birth of Yahya to parents whose bodies had passed the biological threshold of reproduction strike at the very heart of how human beings perceive reality. In every age, humanity tends to fall into the trap of absolute materialism, believing that the observable laws of physics, biology, and chemistry are self-originating and permanently binding upon reality itself. When doctors, scientists, or societal consensus declare a situation biologically impossible, human beings naturally surrender to despair. Zechariah's story completely shatters this intellectual arrogance. It reminds humanity that the laws of nature are not independent deities. They are merely the customary habits of divine creation. The same power that originally commanded life to emerge from lifeless clay retains the perpetual authority to command life to awaken within a withered, barren womb. By experiencing this miracle in his extreme old age, Zechariah was taught, and through him, all of humanity is taught that true faith requires the absolute surrender of our narrow human logic before the boundless expanse of divine possibility. Despair is ultimately an intellectual failure, a symptom of a mind that has forgotten the infinite scale of the Creator while gazing too intently at the finite limitations of the creation. When Zechariah's tongue was miraculously bound in silence for 3 days, it served as a profound physical manifestation of this spiritual reality. The silence of his worldly speech forced his entire consciousness to withdraw from the realm of human explanation, debate, and doubt, centering all his inner faculties entirely upon the remembrance and glorification of the Absolute. The subsequent upbringing of Yahya and their joint prophetic mission in the Judean wilderness stand as a towering testament to the power of intergenerational righteousness. In an empire that ran on the blood of slaves, the exploitation of the poor, and the worship of imperial power, Zechariah and Yahya formed an unbreakable front of moral clarity. They lived as ascetic champions of justice, entirely immune to the glittering bribes of the Herodian court. They ate simply, dressed humbly, and spoke the raw, unvarnished truth to power, knowing full well that tyrants always reserve their sharpest steel for those who dare to expose their moral illegitimacy. When the inevitable collision between prophetic truth and political tyranny occurred, leading to Yahya's decapitation in the dark dungeons of Machaerus and Zechariah's gruesome martyrdom within the hollow of the tree, the cosmic reality of their sacrifice was sealed forever. Their deaths were not an ending, but an immortal victory. They demonstrated to all future generations that a human being who has conquered the fear of death cannot be enslaved by any earthly power. The saw that cut through the wood and the blade that severed the neck could only touch the temporary, mortal shell. They could never extinguish the eternal light of the divine truth that these two prophets carried within their souls. As the centuries continue to roll forward, the legacy of Prophet Zakariya remains a timeless sanctuary for the human spirit. In our contemporary world where individuals constantly battle the crushing weight of anxiety, the loneliness of personal struggles, the societal stigma of unfulfilled expectations, and the suffocating noise of a hypermaterialistic culture, Zechariah's life speaks with an intimate, healing power. He calls us to retreat into the quiet chamber of our own hearts, to lay down our pretenses and vulnerabilities before the Creator, and to whisper our deepest pains with absolute, unwavering trust. He assures us that no matter how long the winter of our personal trials may last, the mercy of the Almighty is forever hovering near, ready to transform our deepest despairs into monuments of eternal grace, and to cause the barren desert of our lives to blossom with the unexpected, miraculous fruits of divine favor. The enduring spiritual resonance of Prophet Zakariah's legacy demands an exploration into the nature of historical cycles, the anatomy of political paranoia, and the profound contrast between human engineering and divine orchestration. When one examines the final years of the late Second Temple era through the combined lens of classical theology and critical historiography, a startling realization emerges. The world that murdered Zechariah was a civilization suffering from terminal spiritual exhaustion. The institutions built to elevate the human soul had become prisons of bureaucratic ritualism, and the political apparatus designed to maintain order had degenerated into an engine of relentless terror. In such a dying culture, the presence of a truly righteous man is not merely inconvenient. It is an existential threat to the illusions of those who profit from moral decay. The ruling authorities of first-century Judea, epitomized by the client kings of the Herodian lineage and their sycophantic allies within the religious hierarchy, lived in an unrelenting state of psychological anxiety. Tyranny is inherently fragile because it derives its authority entirely from external coercion, surveillance, and violence. A tyrant knows that the moment the populace ceases to fear death, the entire scaffolding of imperial dominance instantly crumbles. This explains the profound, almost pathological hatred that Herod Antipas and the compromised temple leadership harbored toward the house of Zechariah. Zechariah and Yahya held no military rank, possessed no treasury, and commanded no armed factions. Yet, their utter detachment from worldly ambition made them completely ungovernable. A man who earns his crust of bread with a carpenter's adze and bows his head only to the Lord of the heavens cannot be bribed with Roman silver, flattered by titles, or frightened into silence by the threat of the sword. This profound dynamic between prophetic incorruptibility and political vulnerability is vividly captured in the classical traditions detailing Zechariah's martyrdom. In the accounts transmitted by early chroniclers, the final confrontation did not arise from a sudden political uprising, but from the relentless, simmering rage of the religious establishment that could no longer tolerate the pure light radiating from Zechariah's circle. After the miraculous birth of Isa to Maryam, an event that stunned Jerusalem and exposed the spiritual bankruptcy of the temple elders who immediately sought to slander her unblemished honor, the corrupt factions turned their destructive fury upon Zechariah. They recognized that it was Zechariah who had sheltered Maryam, validated her purity, and raised a son whose desert sermons were dismantling their religious monopoly. When the armed mob and imperial guards marched upon his modest dwelling to execute him, Zechariah did not resort to counter-violence, nor did he beg for mercy from men who had long since surrendered their humanity. He walked out of the city, moving toward the ancient, rocky ridges surrounding Jerusalem, embodying the dignity of a shepherd who had completed his watch. The legendary splitting of the tree, recorded across classical Islamic tafsir, early Christian apocrypha, and ancient Near Eastern lore, serves as a magnificent literary and metaphysical symbol of nature's alignment with righteousness. In the sacred worldview, the creation itself recognizes the friends of God. The stone, the soil, and the ancient timber possess a deeper spiritual perception than the hardened, blind hearts of corrupt men. When the ancient tree opened its trunk to shield the fleeing prophet, the natural world offered the sanctuary that human society, in its wickedness, had denied him. Yet the horrific conclusion of that chase, where the saw was brought against both the wood and the prophet within, provides the most agonizing and sublime lesson in the entire prophetic canon. Classical scholars, such as Al-Tabari and Ibn Kathir, recount that as the iron teeth bit through the wood and began to tear into his flesh, Zechariah was on the verge of crying out in human agony. In that terrifying moment, divine revelation descended upon his heart, warning him that if a single cry of complaint or curse escaped his lips toward creation, the entire earth would collapse beneath the weight of divine wrath upon his persecutors. Demonstrating a level of patience that transcends ordinary human comprehension, the venerable prophet swallowed his pain, clenched his teeth, and surrendered his spirit in absolute, unbroken silence, drowning the agony of physical dismemberment in the boundless ocean of divine love and contentment. This transcendental patience, Sabr Jamil completely redefines the concept of spiritual victory. To the bloodthirsty crowd gathered around the severed trunk, the saw had accomplished their dark objective. The old carpenter was silenced, the prophetic line was seemingly severed, and their corrupt hegemony was preserved. But in the unseen reality of the heavens, that very moment marked the eternal coronation of Zechariah as one of the supreme martyrs of sacred history. The physical suffering lasted for a fleeting few minutes. The spiritual honor and divine reward bestowed upon his soul will endure across the infinite corridors of eternity. The perpetrators returned to their marble palaces thinking they had won, entirely blind to the reality that they had merely loaded the scales of divine judgment against themselves, sealing their names into eternal infamy. The theological continuity between Zechariah's sacrifice, Yahya's beheading, and the subsequent historical catastrophe that befell Jerusalem offers an undeniable demonstration of the moral laws governing the universe. History is not a series of random, chaotic accidents driven solely by economic variables and military logistics. It is governed by an unbending moral equilibrium. When a society systematically destroys its spiritual guides, mocks the cries of the oppressed, and celebrates the murder of the innocent, it destabilizes its own ontological foundation. The Roman siege of 70 CE, with its horrific scenes of starvation, cannibalism within the besieged walls, and the ultimate leveling of the Second Temple, was the direct, physical crystallization of the spiritual ruin that the leaders of Jerusalem had chosen when they executed the prophets of God. The very stone temple they sought to preserve at the cost of Zechariah's blood became their ultimate tomb, ground into dust by the iron boots of the legions. In stark contrast to the pulverized ruins of the Herodian order, the spiritual sanctuary built by Zechariah's faith remains entirely indestructible. His legacy is not tied to a single plot of land, a specific architectural monument, or an exclusive historical era. Every time a human being across the globe faces an insurmountable crisis and chooses quiet prayer over public despair, the spirit of Zechariah is reborn. Every time an individual refuses to sell their moral conscience for professional promotion, social popularity, or political security, they walk in the footsteps of the holy carpenter of Judea. Every time a parent looks at their child and prays not merely for earthly wealth, but for spiritual integrity and compassionate wisdom, they echo the immortal supplication whispered inside the temple sanctuary 2,000 years ago. The life of Prophet Zakariya ultimately delivers a profound message of radical hope to modern humanity. We inhabit an age often plagued by deep existential fatigue, widespread institutional corruption, hypermaterialistic distractions, and an all-pervasive culture of superficial noise. In such an era, it is dangerously easy to feel overwhelmed, to believe that a single individual's righteousness is meaningless against the colossal machinery of modern distraction and greed. Zechariah's life stands as an absolute, eternal refutation of that despair. He proves that a single soul isolated, aged, impoverished, and surrounded by imperial darkness can alter the entire course of human history simply by remaining true to God in the secret depths of the heart. His life assures us that the Creator is never bound by the limitations of our circumstances, that sincerity is the greatest power in the universe, and that the prayers whispered in our darkest, loneliest hours are the very forces that illuminate the destiny of the world. To enter the sacred geography and spiritual atmosphere that shaped the final years of Prophet Zakariah is to confront the profound relationship between sacred space, physical geography, and the eternal unfolding of divine wisdom. Across the rocky, sun-drenched landscape of the Judean hill country, every stone, terrace, and cistern bore the weight of ancient memories. When Zechariah made his regular pilgrimages from the tranquil hill village of Ein Kerem up to the monumental heights of Mount Moriah in Jerusalem, he was not merely walking a physical road of dust and limestone. He was traversing the spiritual fault line of an entire civilization. Ein Kerem was a sanctuary of verdant olive orchards, fragrant fig trees, and natural springs bubbling up from the earth, a place where the presence of the Creator was felt in the gentle rustle of leaves and the quiet rhythm of agrarian labor. In stark contrast, Jerusalem was a cauldron of political tension, imperial arrogance, and religious theater. The contrast between these two environments mirrored the internal conflict of the age, the pure, unadulterated devotion of the prophetic heart versus the heavy, gilded machinery of institutional religion. In the quiet workshops of Ein Kerem, the rhythm of Zechariah's daily life was marked by the steady, rhythmic scrape of his iron plane against cedar and olive wood. In classical Islamic spirituality, as articulated by the great masters of the inner sciences, manual craftsmanship is seen as a physical manifestation of spiritual discipline. The carpenter does not force the wood into unnatural forms. Rather, he studies the grain, respects its inherent character, removes the rough, uneven surfaces, and patiently shapes it into an instrument of service and beauty. This physical craft was the exact outward mirror of Zechariah's prophetic mission among his people. For decades, he looked upon the fractured, hardened hearts of the children of Israel not with condemnation, but with the patient, discerning eye of a master craftsman. He sought to plane away the rough edges of cynicism, sand down the toxic arrogance born of political subjugation, and gently realign their souls with the original grain of Abrahamic monotheism. This immense patience was nowhere more apparent than in his silent guardianship over Maryam. When classical commentators like al-Zamakhshari and al-Razi examine the relationship between Zechariah and Maryam, they illuminate a profound metaphysical truth regarding the nature of divine preparation. The sanctuary where Maryam resided was not merely a physical refuge from the chaotic courtyards of the temple. It was a cosmic womb wherein the spiritual renewal of the entire world was being quietly nurtured. Zechariah understood that the greatest transformations in human history do not begin with public fanfare, military mobilization, or political declarations in royal courtyards. They begin in the absolute quiet of hidden sanctuaries, in the hearts of consecrated individuals whose devotions are known only to God and the angels. By serving Maryam, carrying water to her elevated chamber, and preserving her sanctity from the corrupting gossip of the temple priests, Zechariah became the essential earthly guardian of a divine secret that would soon reshape the destiny of nations. The profound awakening that Zechariah experienced when witnessing the out-of-season fruits within Maryam's chamber continues to serve as an infinite ocean of reflection for theologians and philosophers across the centuries. In the natural world, the seasonal cycle is the ultimate emblem of human limitation. A farmer cannot command winter to yield the sweet, succulent figs of high summer, nor can he demand that the sweltering heat of August produce the crisp, cold-weather harvests of deep winter. Humanity is bound to the linear flow of time and the immutable laws of seasons. Yet within Maryam's secluded chamber, the linear continuum of time was shattered. Summer and winter met in a single, timeless moment of divine generosity. When Zechariah saw this with his own eyes, the heavy veil of biological time that had weighed down his own hopes was instantly dissolved. He realized that the same sovereign power who collapsed agricultural seasons inside a stone chamber could instantly collapse the chronological decay of his 90-year-old body, commanding the frozen winter of his wife's barrenness to blossom into the vibrant spring of new life. This realization gave birth to a supplication that remains unmatched in its raw, unfiltered authenticity. In the spiritual tradition of Islam, the manner in which Zechariah formulated his prayer is revered as the ultimate etiquette of supplication, adab ad-du'a. Zechariah did not approach God with demands born of entitlement, nor did he attempt to conceal his desperate sorrow beneath a veneer of false strength. He came to his Lord in absolute poverty, displaying his brittle bones, his crown of frost-white hair, and his biological incapacity. In doing so, he taught all of humanity that true prayer begins precisely where human self-sufficiency ends. To stand before the Absolute requires the total shedding of our constructed egos, our titles, and our illusions of control. When a human soul lays its deepest wounds before the Creator with complete, transparent vulnerability, that very vulnerability becomes the vessel into which infinite divine mercy is poured. The birth of Yahya and the remarkable virtues that defined his life represented the complete vindication of Zechariah's unwavering faith. Yahya was not given to his parents merely to bring earthly comfort to their declining years. He was raised to be a living sword of truth in a world drowning in falsehood. While the religious leaders of Jerusalem compromised with Roman authority to preserve their status and wealth, Yahya stepped into the wilderness of the Jordan, wearing the coarse garments of the prophets and consuming the simple food of the earth. His voice was an unyielding trumpet of moral awakening, calling kings and commoners alike to authentic repentance and spiritual purification. In Yahya, the quiet, humble craftsmanship of Zechariah found its fierce, uncompromising voice, demonstrating that true spiritual fatherhood produces children who fear nothing on earth because their hearts are completely captivated by the majesty of the divine. The inevitable convergence of their prophetic missions toward the crucible of martyrdom underscores the timeless reality that the path of truth is always opposed by the entrenched powers of this world. Tyrants and corrupt systems can tolerate many things. They can tolerate private rituals, academic debates, and even superficial moralizing. But what they can never tolerate is a living, fearless moral conscience that directly exposes their injustice and illegitimacy. When Yahya condemned the unlawful union of Herod Antipas, and when Zechariah stood as the immovable pillar of truth behind Maryam and her miraculous child, the corrupt order of Jerusalem realized that these holy men could neither be bribed nor broken. Their death warrants were not signed because they had committed crimes, but because their unblemished righteousness had become an unbearable mirror reflecting the grotesque deformity of the ruling elite. When the final hour arrived, and Zechariah was hunted through the rocky outskirts of the city by an armed mob thirsting for prophetic blood, his retreat into the ancient tree and his subsequent martyrdom sealed his place among the immortal champions of the Spirit. The silence with which he endured the horrific trial of the saw was the ultimate manifestation of his lifelong mastery over the self. For a lifetime, he had practiced the sacred art of silence first in the modest workshop of Ein Kerem, then in the 3 days of divinely mandated muteness before his people, and finally in the agonizing, transcendent threshold between mortal life and eternal glory. By refusing to utter a curse against creation, Zechariah preserved the boundless ocean of divine mercy for future generations, absorbing the full violence of worldly hatred without allowing a single drop of malice to corrupt the purity of his soul. Today, as the modern world speeds through an era of unprecedented noise, technological distraction, and moral ambiguity, the ancient priest and carpenter of Judea stands as an indispensable guide for the human spirit. He reminds us that the true measure of a human life is not found in the scale of one's material empire, the volume of public acclaim, or the immediate results visible within a single lifetime. Rather, true significance lies in the quiet, uncompromising preservation of moral integrity, the tender care bestowed upon those entrusted to our protection, and the unshakable certainty that no sincere prayer whispered in the dark is ever forgotten by the Lord of the worlds. Through the eternal brilliance of his example, Prophet Zakariah continues to illuminate the path for every wandering traveler, proving that faith can conquer biological impossibility, that patience can outlast the cruelty of empires, and that the light of divine truth will forever shine supreme over the darkest shadows of human history. When the theological and moral trajectory of Prophet Zakariah's life is surveyed across the immense expanse of world history, one is compelled to examine the profound concept of sacred continuity, the uninterrupted golden thread of divine guidance that runs through the rise and fall of human empires. In the classical Islamic philosophy of history, as expounded by master thinkers such as Ibn Khaldun and Fakhr al-Din al-Razi, human societies operate along distinct spiritual and ethical life cycles. A civilization rises when it is anchored in moral integrity, transcendent purpose, and selfless devotion to justice. It inevitably declines and dissolves when its leaders and institutions succumb to luxury, spiritual hypocrisy, moral cowardice, and the ruthless exploitation of the weak. First-century Judea was living through the final, catastrophic phase of just such a civilizational collapse, and Zechariah was placed at its very center to serve as the ultimate witness to the truth before the hammer of historical judgment fell. The profound tragedy of the religious establishment of Jerusalem during Zechariah's lifetime was not that they lacked knowledge, but that their knowledge had been stripped entirely of spiritual life. The priests and scribes could recite the intricate legal codes of the Torah, debate the minutiae of ceremonial purifications, and calculate the exact dimensions of altar sacrifices down to the smallest fraction. Yet, their hearts had turned into cold, unyielding stone. They had converted the living faith of Abraham, Moses, and David into a mechanical industry of prestige and political control. They fawned over Roman governors, flattered client kings who violated every sacred commandment, and looked down with undisguised contempt upon the ordinary, broken-hearted commoners who came to the temple seeking genuine solace. In stark, blinding opposition to this institutional petrifaction, Zechariah demonstrated what living, vibrant faith actually looks like in practice. For 90 years, his devotion had not hardened into rigid cynicism. He had performed the sacred rites within the sanctuary thousands of times, yet every single time he stepped before the veil, he did so with the fresh, trembling awe of a beginner entering the presence of the divine for the very first time. His carpentry was not a mundane distraction from his spiritual life, but an active, physical extension of his worship. Every stroke of his chisel, every smoothing of the rough timber, was infused with the same meticulous mindfulness that characterized his prayers in the sanctuary. He demonstrated that true spirituality does not require a human being to retreat into an ivory tower of intellectual detachment, but rather demands that one bring transcendent excellence into the raw, physical labor of daily survival. This radical authenticity is precisely what enabled him to perceive the miraculous sign within Maryam's secluded chamber when everyone else was blind to it. Other priests who occasionally caught glimpses of Maryam's ascetic devotion saw only a young, fatherless girl who was an administrative responsibility to be managed or a political prize to be claimed. Zechariah, whose spiritual vision had been sharpened by decades of pure devotion and humble labor, saw her true cosmic station. He recognized that her chamber was the physical threshold where heaven and earth were meeting to inaugurate a new era of redemption. His heart was so profoundly free of the poison of spiritual arrogance that he did not hesitate for a single second to allow a young girl under his care to become his teacher in the ultimate realities of divine grace. The prayer that burst forth from his soul in that secluded sanctuary remains one of the most powerful psychological and metaphysical moments in recorded history. In that singular instant, Zakariya stepped entirely outside the prison of human limitations. He looked directly at his crumbling physical vessel, his 90-year-old bones that ached with the fatigue of a century of labor, his hair that had turned entirely white like the frost of winter, and the lifelong barrenness of his beloved wife Elizabeth, and he declared that none of these physical realities possessed the final word. He understood that while human beings live within the finite world of natural cause and effect, the Creator exists in absolute sovereignty above all causes. By uttering that whispered supplication, Zakariya performed a revolutionary act of spiritual rebellion against the tyrannical God of human limitation, declaring that divine mercy is an infinite ocean that can never be exhausted by the impossibility of circumstances. The granting of Yahya was the cosmic validation of that unshakable conviction. Yahya was not born through the standard, predictable mechanics of youthful biology. He was spoken into existence by the direct, creative command of the divine, serving as a living bridge between the miraculous and the historical. From his earliest moments, Yahya was imbued with a supernatural clarity of vision and an extraordinary tenderness of heart. In classical tafsir literature, it is recorded that while other children played in the streets of the villages, Yahya was drawn entirely to the solitude of nature, weeping over the spiritual blindness of humanity and meditating upon the divine words. When other youths sought fine garments, comfortable homes, and social status, Yahya chose the rough camel hair of the desert, the wild honey of the canyons, and the uncompromising pursuit of absolute truth. The partnership between this Holy Father and his miraculous Son created an unstoppable moral force that shook the foundations of Judean society. Zakariya represented the quiet, enduring wisdom of the ancient prophetic line, while Yahya represented the roaring, fearless awakening of the new dawn. Together, they formed an unassailable bastion of righteousness that neither the gold of the temple aristocracy nor the iron swords of the Roman legions could penetrate. When Yahya stood on the banks of the Jordan River, immersing the repentant masses and fearlessly calling out the moral crimes of the ruling dynasty, he was carrying the uncorrupted legacy of his father directly into the public square. He was the living answer to Zakariya's whispered prayer, a righteous heir who inherited the mantle of the house of Jacob and defended the divine covenant against the encroaching darkness. The catastrophic climax of their lives, the horrific beheading of Yahya in the gloomy fortress of Machaerus, and the pursuit and brutal martyrdom of Zakariya in the ancient grove, was the inevitable collision between unadulterated divine light and absolute worldly corruption. When a society has become utterly enslaved to its own lusts, power dynamics, and material ambitions, it cannot tolerate the existence of individuals whose very lives serve as a living indictment of their depravity. The executioners who swung the blade upon Yahya's neck and the bloodthirsty mob that brought the saw to the hollowed tree believed that they were extinguishing the voice of truth. They operated under the pathetic, short-sighted illusion that by destroying the physical body of a prophet, they could somehow murder the message he carried. What they failed to understand is that the blood of the righteous is never spilled in vain. It acts as a sacred catalyst that unseals the judgment of history. The corrupt dynasty of the Herodians and the treacherous factions of the temple leadership bought themselves a few fleeting years of political security at the price of prophetic blood. But within a single generation, the cosmic scales of divine justice tilted, and the Roman armies they had courted and appeased descended upon Jerusalem like an apocalyptic tempest. The city was pulverized, the temple was incinerated into ash, and the names of the persecutors were stamped with eternal infamy and historical condemnation. Meanwhile, the humble carpenter of Ein Karim and his fearless desert-dwelling son rose into the realm of immortal glory. Their names are spoken with profound reverence by billions of human beings across the globe, transcending geographical borders, linguistic barriers, and theological divides. In Islamic tradition, the Quranic verses detailing Zakariya's prayer and Yahya's noble character are recited daily in prayers from Mecca to Medina, from Cairo to Jakarta, and across every corner of the earth. In Christian tradition, their memories are enshrined in the foundational narratives of the Gospels, celebrated as the indispensable heralds who prepared the way for the Prince of Peace. For the modern seeker living in an age characterized by unprecedented technological acceleration, sensory saturation, institutional cynicism, and deep existential anxiety, the life of Prophet Zakariya offers an indispensable spiritual compass. He teaches us that our deepest value lies not in what we amass from this fleeting world, but in what we are willing to sacrifice for the preservation of truth. He demonstrates that a life of quiet, honest craftsmanship and private devotion is infinitely more powerful than a life spent chasing the shallow applause of crowds. He reminds every parent that the greatest inheritance we can leave our children is not material wealth or worldly titles, but an unyielding commitment to moral courage, spiritual authenticity, and unconditional trust in the Almighty. Above all else, Prophet Zakariya stands as the eternal champion of human hope against the absolute abyss of despair. He speaks to every human heart that feels broken, forgotten, aged, or barren, reminding us that with the Lord of the worlds, no situation is ever beyond redemption, no door is ever permanently locked, and no sincere prayer whispered in the silence of the night is ever lost. Through the immortal radiance of his life, his patience, and his supreme sacrifice, Prophet Zakariya proves that the light of divine truth will forever outshine the darkest shadows of this world, guiding humanity with an eternal, unquenchable flame until the end of time. When we peer deeply into the eternal architecture of divine revelation, the narrative of Prophet Zakariya emerges not merely as a historical chronicle of an ancient Levantine sage, but as an exhaustive metaphysical manual on the absolute reality of spiritual inheritance, existential trust, and the cosmic triumph of vulnerability over brute force. In the profound contemplative traditions of Islamic philosophy, particularly within the classical discourses of scholars like Imam al-Qashari, Imam al-Badawi, and Shah Wali al-Adalawi, the life of Zakariya is dissected as an essential key to understanding the subtle interplay between the divine realm of eternal decrees, Alam al-Malakut, and the physical realm of tangible witnesses, Alam al-Mulk. Zakariya was stationed precisely at the intersection of these two realities, embodying the rare human capacity to gaze upon the crumbling, decrepit decay of the material world while simultaneously perceiving the vibrant, unconstrained abundance of the spiritual realm. The true weight of his prophetic office cannot be understood without examining the psychological burden of longevity in a world that is losing its soul. To live for nearly a century as an uncompromising man of God means witnessing several successive generations surrender their sacred birthrights for the temporary scraps of worldly power. Zakariya had watched his childhood companions grow old and compromise their youthful ideals. He had seen young, promising students of the scriptures abandon the rigorous path of ascetic integrity to take high-paying, politicized administrative roles within the Herodian apparatus. He had watched the sacred courtyards of the sanctuary gradually transform from an oasis of pure monotheistic devotion into a bustling marketplace of political intrigue, currency exchange, and social posturing. To stand firm for 90 years in such an environment, without succumbing to the toxic poison of misanthropy, cynicism, or spiritual pride, is a miracle of the heart far greater than any physical anomaly. Zechariah preserved the tenderness of his heart through the rigorous discipline of private remembrance and physical labor. In classical Islamic ethics, the concept of earning through lawful manual toil, al-kasb al-halal*, is understood not merely as an economic duty, but as a foundational spiritual shield that protects the human soul from arrogance and dependency on creation. As a carpenter, Zechariah lived in direct, tactile conversation with the raw materials of the earth. In shaping rough, unyielding timber into functional furniture, doors, and roofing beams, he engaged in a continuous, silent meditation on the nature of patience, transformation, and structural integrity. A carpenter understands that what cannot be rushed. It must be seasoned, dried, measured, and cut with absolute precision according to its natural grain. This profound physical patience was the exact spiritual furnace in which his capacity to endure 9 decades of barrenness, societal decline, and institutional corruption was forged. He did not attempt to force the divine decree before its appointed time, just as a master woodworker does not build with green, unseasoned timber that would warp and crack under the sun. This supreme mastery of spiritual patience, *sabr*, reached its glorious summit during his guardianship over Maryam. When the lots were cast and the reed pens were thrown into the rushing currents of the Jordan River, the miraculous preservation of Zechariah's pen was an undeniable celestial sign that he was the only soul in the entirety of the Levant equipped with the profound purity, humility, and spiritual gravity required to foster the mother of the Messiah. In the traditional commentaries of Surah Al-Imran, it is highlighted that Zechariah's primary role as Maryam's guardian, *kafil*, was to build a protective sanctuary around her spiritual development. He recognized that the coming manifestation of divine grace demanded an atmosphere entirely free from the polluted air of sectarian theological debates and institutional vanity. Inside the elevated chamber, *mirab*, of the sanctuary, Zechariah created a sacred haven of silence, prayer, and contemplation. The dynamic between the venerable, white-haired high priest and the consecrated young maiden was marked by an extraordinary, transcendent purity. There was no trace of patriarchal dominance or intellectual condescension in Zechariah's demeanor. When he unlocked the chamber doors and witnessed the celestial provisions, fruits of summer fragrant and fresh in the dead of winter, and the fruits of winter dew-laden in the blistering heat of high summer, he did not respond with suspicion, theological skepticism, or wounded professional pride. Instead, he stood in utter, childlike awe. He recognized that the Creator's relationship with his righteous servants is entirely unbound by human hierarchies of age, institutional seniority, or gender. That specific moment within Maryam's chamber, immortalized in the sacred texts, represents the definitive turning point where human logic collapses into pure, divine certainty, *yakin*. Zechariah looked upon those out-of-season fruits and understood their profound metaphysical language. The fruits were not merely food. They were a direct, visual message from the Lord of the worlds, declaring that the laws of nature are not sovereign masters, but obedient servants of the divine command. If the Creator can effortlessly suspend the immutable agricultural seasons of the earth to nourish a pure maiden in a stone chamber, then the biological winter of Zechariah's 90-year-old body and the lifelong barrenness of his beloved wife Elizabeth were completely irrelevant before the infinite creative power of the Almighty. It was precisely from this profound epiphany that the immortal prayer of Zechariah arose. When he turned toward the sanctuary and whispered his plea into the silence of the night, he was engaging in an act of pure, unadulterated monotheism, *tawhid*. He did not ask for wealth, land, titles, or a peaceful retirement from his labors. His entire supplication was centered on a single, burning spiritual objective: the preservation of the divine covenant for future generations. He looked at the horizon of Judea, saw the corrupt, politicized wolves waiting to devour the spiritual heritage of the children of Israel after his death, and begged for a righteous heir who would inherit the mantle of spiritual wisdom and moral courage from the house of Jacob. In that whispered prayer, Zechariah modeled the supreme ideal of spiritual parenthood, teaching humanity that a child is not an earthly possession or an instrument of biological vanity, but a consecrated trust designed to uphold justice, compassion, and divine remembrance upon the earth. The celestial response to his supplication, the appearance of the archangel Gabriel, and the glad tidings of Yahweh was the ultimate proof that sincere prayer is the most powerful force in the cosmos. The divine decree did not merely grant him a son. It bestowed upon the child a name never before given to any human being, along with an unblemished station of wisdom, chastity, and prophetic authority from his earliest youth. The 3 days of divinely imposed silence that followed served as a sacred threshold, teaching humanity that when heaven is orchestrating a miracle of cosmic proportions, the appropriate human response is not verbose commentary or worldly celebration, but deep, contemplative silence and continuous, rhythmic glorification of the divine at dawn and dusk. The subsequent life of Yahweh, his ascetic ministry in the wilderness of the Jordan, his fearless confrontation with the moral crimes of King Herod Antipas, and his ultimate martyrdom through decapitation, formed the living, breathing continuation of Zechariah's uncompromised legacy. Father and son walked the earth as an unbroken front of divine truth against an empire that traded in human blood and spiritual deceit. And when the corrupt factions of Jerusalem ultimately hunted down the aging patriarch Zechariah, pursuing him into the ancient grove where he met his horrific martyrdom inside the hollow of the tree, their cruelty did not mark the defeat of the prophet. It marked the definitive, catastrophic moral suicide of the Second Temple Order. The blood of Zechariah and Yahweh unsealed the judgment of history, paving the way for the catastrophic Roman destruction of 70 CE, while elevating their own names into the eternal assembly of the righteous. As we reflect upon the vast, luminous horizon of Prophet Zakariah's life, we are presented with an eternal blueprint for the human soul. His journey across a century of trial, devotion, manual craftsmanship, private supplication, and ultimate martyrdom proves to every wandering traveler that human helplessness is never a barrier to divine grace. Rather, it is the exact vessel into which the boundless power of the Creator is poured. Through his unyielding patience, his sacred silence, and his immortal whispered prayer, Prophet Zakariah remains a timeless beacon of hope, reminding all of humanity that no winter of despair is permanent, no sincere plea is ever forgotten, and the light of divine truth will forever shine supreme over the darkest corridors of human history. The cosmic narrative of Prophet Zakariah invites us to venture into the deepest metaphysical intersections of sacrifice, spiritual geometry, and the eternal vindication of the prophetic spirit. When we gaze across the long, turbulent horizon of classical antiquity, the physical landscape of the ancient Levant often appears as a graveyard of fractured dynasties and forgotten monuments. The imposing Roman aqueducts that once channeled water across the rugged valleys of Judea now stand in fractured ruin. The marble palaces where client monarchs indulged their paranoid cruelties are buried beneath layers of desert silt, and the immense foundation stones of the Herodian temple have become silent witnesses to the devastating fragility of human ambition. Yet, amidst this vast panorama of imperial decay, the spiritual sanctuary built by Zechariah's quiet devotion remains completely untouched by the erosion of time, shining with an unblemished, luminous clarity that continues to guide the human conscience across millennia. To truly understand the profound depth of Zechariah's spiritual station, one must contemplate the extraordinary paradox of his earthly existence. In the eyes of his contemporaries who measured worth through the crude metrics of worldly prestige, Zechariah was an unassuming, impoverished elder whose life was defined by quiet labor and unfulfilled biological expectations. He commanded no legions of armored soldiers, held no shares in the lucrative trade routes spanning the Mediterranean, and possessed no influence in the smoky backrooms where Roman governors and high priestly aristocrats traded the destinies of nations. He walked the dusty roads of Palestine with the humble gait of a craftsman whose hands were worn rough by cedar timber and iron chisels, carrying inside his heart a sacred grief that he shared with no one except the sovereign of the heavens and the earth. Yet, in the unseen geography of the spiritual world, this humble carpenter was the undisputed pillar upon which the entire spiritual continuity of the Abrahamic covenant rested during the darkest hour of the Second Temple period. Classical Islamic exegetes, Christian patristic writers, and ancient chroniclers all converge upon a singular, awe-inspiring reality. Zechariah was the indispensable human conduit through whom the divine order preserved the sanctity of the prophetic lineage, setting the stage for the dramatic, world-transforming advent of the Messianic era. Without his unyielding spiritual vigilance, his absolute detachment from the corrupting seductions of the Herodian court, and his fearless willingness to foster the consecrated Maryam against the bitter opposition of the religious establishment, the sacred environment required for the dawn of a new spiritual epoch would have been utterly compromised. Consider the profound, contemplative atmosphere that Zechariah cultivated during his daily service within the temple sanctuary. In the traditional literature of prophetic biographies, Keses Alanbaya**, it is recorded that Zechariah did not enter the Holy of Holies as a functionary performing dry, mechanical rituals for the sake of public spectacle or professional obligation. Every step he took across the polished stone floors was an act of profound existential trembling. When he lifted the heavy curtains and stood before the altar of incense, his soul was entirely engulfed in the contemplation of the divine majesty, *Jalal*, and the divine beauty, *Jamal*. He understood that the physical temple was merely an outward symbol, an earthly shadow of the true, uncreated throne of God. While other priests viewed the sanctuary as a source of social authority and financial revenue, Zechariah treated every square inch of that sacred space as a crucible for the absolute annihilation of the human ego. This total eradication of self-interest was nowhere more brilliantly demonstrated than in his response to the miraculous sustenance granted to Maryam. In ordinary human affairs, nothing threatens an established authority figure more than the appearance of an unearned, transcendent gift in one who is younger, socially subordinate, and formally under their care. The human ego, poisoned by the subtle sickness of spiritual pride, instinctively demands that divine blessings flow through recognized institutional channels and established hierarchies. Had Zechariah possessed even an atom's weight of spiritual jealousy, his heart would have constricted with resentment upon finding the out-of-season fruits resting in Maryam's elevated chamber. He would have questioned why a young maiden in seclusion was receiving celestial provisions, while an aged high priest who had served at the altar for 70 years was left to labor for his daily crust of bread. Instead, the heart of Zechariah was so pristine, so thoroughly washed clean of the foul dust of envy, that Maryam's miracle instantly became the wellspring of his own ultimate spiritual elevation. He looked upon the summer fruits glistening in the cold chill of winter, and the winter harvest fragrant in the heat of summer, and his soul soared in pure, unadulterated adoration of divine omnipotence. In the profound terminology of classical Sufism, Zechariah's vision was completely purified from the illusion of duality. He did not see Maryam's favor as an exclusion of himself, but as a direct, universal revelation of the infinite generosity of the Creator. He understood that in the presence of the Absolute, there is no scarcity, no competition, and no limitation. That singular realization dissolved the last remnants of human doubt within his consciousness, providing the spiritual catalyst for the immortal prayer that would shatter the biological barrenness of his home. The metaphysical mechanics of that supplication, whispered in the dim light of the sanctuary, offer an eternal lesson in the spiritual reality of vulnerability. When Zechariah laid bare the frailty of his physical vessel, the brittleness of his aged bones, and the white fire of his gray hair, he was not engaging in self-pity or theatrical lamentation. He was performing the ultimate spiritual act of total self-emptying, ***. In the divine economy, the vessel that is full of its own perceived strength, its own intellect, and its own worldly resources cannot receive the unadulterated wine of divine grace. It is only when the human vessel is completely emptied of all pretension, when it stands before the Creator in utter, transparent helplessness, that the infinite power of the Almighty rushes in to fill the void. Zechariah's prayer was an ontological confession that human strength is an illusion, that natural causes are mere veils, and that life itself is a perpetual gift spoken into existence by the unconstrained command of the Lord of the worlds. The celestial granting of Yahya, along with the divinely bestowed sign of 3 days of sacred silence, serves as an immortal monument to the transcendent peace that accompanies absolute surrender. During those 72 hours of speechlessness, Zechariah lived in a state of continuous, uninterrupted communion with the divine. His physical tongue was bound from worldly discourse, but the faculties of his soul were elevated into the celestial spheres, contemplating the unfolding of a miracle that would bridge the ancient world of the patriarchs with the revolutionary dawn of the messianic message. When he emerged before the expectant crowds, gesturing for them to glorify their Creator at dawn and dusk, he was not merely communicating a practical instruction. He was inviting the entire community to step out of the frantic, noisy distractions of temporal life and enter into the profound, transformative sanctuary of eternal remembrance. The subsequent life, ascetic wilderness ministry, and tragic martyrdom of his son Yahya, followed by Zechariah's own gruesome death within the hollow of the ancient tree, represents the ultimate, inevitable collision between the kingdom of eternal truth and the corrupt empires of this fleeting world. The executioners, the corrupt priests, and the tyrannical monarchs who orchestrated these horrific murders believed that they had won a decisive victory. They looked upon the severed neck of the desert prophet and the sawed timber of the ancient grove, and they congratulated themselves on having permanently silenced the inconvenient voices of moral conscience. Yet, the unerring judgment of history has delivered its absolute, devastating verdict. The names of the persecutors have become universal synonyms for villainy, cowardice, and spiritual blindness, their grand marble palaces pulverized into dust, and their political achievements swallowed whole by the sands of time. In stark, blinding contrast, the names of Prophet Zakariya and Prophet Yahya remain eternally illuminated across the global human conscience. Their memories are enshrined within the sacred scriptures of world religions, recited with profound reverence by billions of human hearts, and honored as the supreme exemplars of uncompromising courage, boundless patience, and unyielding faith. For the modern seeker walking through an increasingly complex, noisy, and spiritually fragmented world, the life of Prophet Zakariya offers an enduring sanctuary of wisdom and hope. He calls across the vast ocean of 2 millennia to every soul that feels exhausted by the trials of life, burdened by the physical decay of the body, or trapped in the suffocating barrenness of deferred dreams. He reminds us that no circumstance is ever beyond the transformative touch of divine mercy, that no sincere prayer uttered in the secrecy of the heart is ever lost, and that the quietest whisper of unyielding faith is infinitely more powerful than all the roaring tyrannies of the earth combined. Through his life of humble craftsmanship, his profound guardianship, his sacred silence, and his ultimate sacrifice, Prophet Zakariya stands as an immortal beacon of light, guiding humanity toward the eternal shores of truth, patience, and transcendent peace until the final chapter of human history is closed forever. To step back and view the epic continuum of Prophet Zakariya's life is to witness the ultimate resolution of one of the greatest theological dramas ever enacted on the stage of human civilization. When we trace the long, winding trajectory of prophetic history from the ancient sands of Mesopotamia through the wilderness of Sinai and into the rugged limestone terraces of first-century Judea, we see that every major epoch of spiritual renewal is preceded by a season of intense, almost suffocating darkness. The era of Zechariah was the definitive manifestation of such an epical twilight. It was a time when the external symbols of faith were magnified to colossal proportions by imperial architects, even as the internal reality of spiritual devotion was systematically drained of all authentic vitality. In this stark landscape of gilded hypocrisy and military occupation, the life of Zechariah served as the vital, living bridge that preserved the sacred transmission of divine truth, ensuring that the covenant made with the ancient patriarchs did not perish beneath the crushing wheels of imperial Rome. The profound significance of Zechariah's legacy becomes even more staggering when we analyze the profound theological transition that occurred through his household. For centuries, the religious life of the children of Israel had been mediated through the complex apparatus of the Levitical and Aaronic priesthood system defined by hereditary succession, physical altar sacrifices, meticulous dietary purifications, and the physical centrality of the Jerusalem sanctuary. Zechariah was the crown jewel of this ancient lineage, an authentic descendant of Aaron who carried out the sacred ordinances with pure, unblemished fidelity. Yet, through his very hands, the divine decree began the monumental transition from the old dispensation of physical temples and national covenants toward the universal, spirit-centered renewal that would characterize the Messianic era and the final revelation to humanity. By fostering Maryam within the elevated chamber of the temple, Zechariah was not merely protecting a pious orphan. He was actively guarding the sacred vessel through which the Word of God would enter the world without the agency of a human father. And by fathering Yahya through a miraculous intervention in his own extreme old age, Zechariah introduced into the world the fiery, ascetic forerunner who would strip away the centuries of rabbinical legalism and ritual complacency, calling humanity back to the raw, pulsating essence of heart-centered repentance and moral accountability. Thus, the humble carpenter of Ein Kerem stood at the precise crossroads of two cosmic eras. He was the final, consummate guardian of the ancient Mosaic sanctuary system, and simultaneously the indispensable human architect who prepared the physical and spiritual ground for the transformative dawn of Jesus of Nazareth. When we examine the archaeological and historical realities of this period, the contrast between the fleeting works of worldly rulers and the permanent legacy of Zechariah becomes an undeniable historical fact. Modern excavations throughout the city of David, the Western Wall tunnels, and the desolate desert cliffs of Machaerus and Masada have unearthed the immense physical scale of the Herodian enterprise. Archaeologists have uncovered monumental ashlar blocks weighing hundreds of tons, luxurious Roman-style bathhouses adorned with ornate frescoes, and fortified palaces designed to withstand prolonged sieges. These were the structures built by the men who held absolute political power, the men who looked upon the elderly priest Zechariah with aristocratic disdain and eventually signed his death warrant. Yet today, these grand architectural achievements exist solely as fractured stones, tourist destinations, and silent ruins under the desert sun. The political dynasties that built them vanished within decades, remembered only for their grotesque paranoia, their incestuous scandals, and their catastrophic destruction at the hands of the Roman legions. In contrast, the spiritual architecture built by Prophet Zakariah constructed not with cut limestone, Roman mortar, or gilded cedar, but with the invisible materials of sincere prayer, sacred silence, ethical labor, and radical trust in the divine remains as vibrant, influential, and universally revered today as it was 2,000 years ago. In every corner of the modern world, across diverse continents, cultures, and languages, the story of Zechariah continues to be read, contemplated, and loved. When a devout Muslim recites the opening verses of Surah Maryam in the quiet hours before the dawn prayer, their soul is transported directly to that incense-filled chamber where an old man whispered his impossible longing to the Creator of the universe. When a Christian scholar or believer opens the Gospel of Luke to reflect upon the canticle of Zechariah, they are meditating upon the very words of praise that broke through 9 months of silence to herald the rising sun of divine mercy. And when an honest historian examines the roots of the ethical revolution that transformed the Western and Near Eastern worlds, they are forced to acknowledge the quiet, steadfast craftsman of Judea who stood firm when all around him was falling into ruin. The profound psychological lessons embedded in Zechariah's life speak with urgent relevance to the anxieties and fractures of our contemporary world. Modern humanity lives in an unprecedented era of sensory overload, algorithmic distraction, and hyperconnectivity, yet it is simultaneously plagued by an epidemic of profound loneliness, cynicism, and spiritual barrenness. We are constantly pressured to define our worth through the external metrics of social visibility, financial accumulation, and immediate material results. In such a high-pressure, superficial culture, the soul easily falls into the paralyzing trap of despair whenever its immediate plans are delayed or whenever its circumstances appear biologically, economically, or socially impossible. To this modern malaise, Prophet Zakariah offers a timeless, healing antidote. He demonstrates that a human being's true value is not measured by the volume of noise they generate in the public square, but by the depth of their integrity when they are completely alone before God. He proves that a lifetime of quiet, uncelebrated labor shaping wood with calloused hands, caring for a barren home with tender patience, and performing one's daily duties with meticulous excellence is infinitely more valuable in the eyes of heaven than the glittering achievements of those who sell their souls for worldly prestige. He reminds every struggling soul that divine delays are never divine rejections. Rather, they are the profound, mysterious preparations through which the Almighty empties the human heart of all reliance on worldly means, expanding its capacity to receive a miracle that will resonate far beyond the boundaries of a single lifetime. Furthermore, Zechariah's 3 days of divinely ordained silence provide a revolutionary paradigm for modern human communication. In a world where everyone is shouting, debating, and competing to have the final word, Zechariah teaches us the sacred power of quietude. He shows that before we can speak words of transformative truth to others, we must first learn to silence the clamor of our own egos, still the turbulent waters of our anxieties, and immerse our faculties in the continuous, rhythmic remembrance of the divine. His silence was not an empty absence of speech, but a pregnant, luminous presence of absolute certainty, a sacred stillness that allowed his heart to align perfectly with the cosmic symphony of divine praise that resonates through every atom of creation. As we bring this monumental historical and spiritual chronicle to its ultimate close, the figure of Prophet Zakariah emerges not as a distant relic of an ancient Levantine past, but as an eternal, living companion for the human spirit. He stands upon the high ridges of sacred history as the undisputed champion of hope against despair, of vulnerability against brute power, and of eternal truth against temporary tyranny. He walked through 90 years of personal grief without ever losing his tenderness. He looked upon the impossible and saw only the infinite creative freedom of his Lord. He raised the greatest herald of truth in the wilderness. He guarded the purest maiden in creation, and he sealed his unblemished testimony with the supreme honor of martyrdom. His life remains an immortal beacon of light, cutting through the thickest darkness of human history and reminding every wandering traveler across the ages that no prayer uttered from a sincere heart is ever forgotten, no winter of the soul is everlasting, and the mercy of the Lord of the worlds is forever boundless, unconstrained, and victorious until the end of time. When we explore the final theological reflections of Prophet Zakariya's life, we encounter the majestic summit of sacred history, where temporal history dissolves into eternal truth. To evaluate the total impact of this singular prophet, one must observe how his life functions as a profound mirror held up to the human soul across every epoch, culture, and civilization. The journey of Zakariya is not an isolated chronicle confined to the geographic corridor between Jerusalem and the Judean hills. It is the archetypal journey of every human heart that seeks to navigate the stormy waters of worldly corruption while remaining anchored to the unyielding shore of divine truth. The enduring power of his story lies in its radical subversion of human expectations regarding spiritual victory. Throughout secular history, triumphs are recorded in the language of conquest, annexation, legislative dominance, and monumental construction. The names of Julius Caesar, Mark Antony, and Herod the Great were carved into triumphal arches, stamped onto imperial coinage, and proclaimed from the marble rostrums of the Mediterranean world. They commanded fleets that dominated the seas and armies that leveled cities. Yet, when the veil of time is drawn back, what remains of their monumental ambitions? Their empires fractured, their marble halls collapsed under the weight of history, and their proud dynasties were extinguished, surviving only as cautionary tales of tyrannical vanity. In sharp contrast, Prophet Zakariya possessed none of the instruments of worldly power. He had no legion at his command, no gold in the vaults of the Roman treasury, and no political leverage within the Sanhedrin. He was a simple, aging carpenter whose hands were marked by the honest labor of his craft, and whose days were spent in the quiet service of the sanctuary. Yet the spiritual empire he founded built upon the invisible foundations of pure monotheism, radical vulnerability before the Creator, and selfless guardianship over the vessels of divine revelation remains as vibrant, indestructible, and universally revered today as it was when the Archangel Gabriel descended into the incense-filled chamber of the temple. This profound historical vindication demonstrates that the universe is governed by an unshakable moral equilibrium. The materialist worldview, which measures reality solely through the prism of physical force and immediate tangible outcomes, is perpetually blinded by the illusions of the present moment. It looks upon the humble, elderly prophet being hunted down by an armed mob and declares him defeated. It looks upon the saw cutting through the ancient timber and pronounces evil victorious. But sacred history completely obliterates this shallow perception. It reveals that the moment of the martyr's supreme sacrifice is not the hour of his destruction, but the hour of his eternal coronation. By laying down his life rather than compromising with the corrupted rulers of his day, Zakariya stripped the tyrants of their only weapon, the power to inspire fear. In doing so, he achieved the ultimate spiritual liberation, demonstrating that a soul completely surrendered to the Almighty is entirely unconquerable by any earthly power. The profound lessons of Zakariya's life resonate with unmatched urgency in our modern world. Today, humanity finds itself engulfed in an unprecedented crisis of meaning, marked by relentless technological noise, hyper-individualism, institutional disillusionment, and widespread spiritual fatigue. Modern individuals are bombarded daily with messages that equate human dignity with material accumulation, physical youth, social media visibility, and political influence. When faced with seasons of hardship, biological limitations, prolonged grief, or unanswered prayers, modern people frequently succumb to despair, assuming that their lives are meaningless because they have failed to achieve the superficial milestones dictated by society. To every soul navigating these modern trials, Prophet Zakariah offers a sublime, transformative refuge. He stands as an eternal witness that human worth is not determined by the applause of crowds, the accumulation of wealth, or the speed with which our desires are fulfilled. He reminds us that 9 decades of quiet, uncelebrated faithfulness, spending years shaping wood with patient hands, loving a barren spouse with tenderness, and serving one's community with unblemished honesty is of infinite value in the sight of God. He teaches us that the seasons of waiting, which the world dismisses as wasted time, are the very crucibles in which the soul is purified of self-reliance and expanded to hold the weight of miraculous grace. Furthermore, Zechariah's example provides a timeless blueprint for spiritual mentorship, ethical leadership, and familial devotion. In an age characterized by generational conflict, patriarchal authoritarianism, and cynical competition, Zechariah demonstrates the profound beauty of selfless guardianship. He did not view Maryam as a rival or a threat to his priestly authority. He recognized her transcendent purity, protected her sanctuary with his life, and allowed her unyielding faith to reignite his own deepest supplications. When Yahya was granted to him, he did not train his son to pursue the lucrative careers of the temple aristocracy. He instilled within him the fearless moral courage required to speak truth to tyrants, preparing him to be a roaring voice of conscience in the wilderness. Above all else, Prophet Zakariah remains the eternal champion of pure, unadulterated prayer. His whispered supplication in the secrecy of the sanctuary serves as an immortal masterclass in the art of approaching the divine. He shows us that true prayer requires no theatrical performance, no complex rhetoric, and no disguise of our human frailty. It requires only that we strip away the illusions of our ego, acknowledge our utter helplessness, and place our deepest pains before the infinite mercy of the Creator with absolute, unwavering trust. He proves that the laws of nature, the judgments of society, and the cold calculations of biology are powerless before the divine command. When the heart truly surrenders, the barren desert blossoms with life, the frozen winter yields the fruits of summer, and the impossible becomes the living reality of divine grace. As the narrative of Prophet Zakariah echoes down through the corridors of 2,000 years, it leaves an indelible, luminous imprint upon the collective consciousness of humanity. His life stands as an eternal bridge between the ancient covenant of the patriarchs and the dawning light of universal redemption. He lived as a humble worker, served as a holy priest, protected the mother of the Messiah, fathered the fearless prophet of the desert, and died as an unblemished martyr for the truth. In every generation, across every land, wherever a weary soul turns toward the heavens in the quiet darkness of the night, whispering an impossible hope with a trembling heart, the spirit of Prophet Zakariah is there, illuminating the path with an eternal, unquenchable flame, assuring every traveler that the Lord of the worlds hears every whisper, mends every broken heart, and remains forever near to those who trust in his boundless, unconstrained mercy. When we contemplate the vast spiritual architecture of the prophetic legacy, the memory of Prophet Zakariah invites us into the highest realms of contemplative metaphysics, sacred hermeneutics, and ethical philosophy. To truly fathom the depth of his life, one must step beyond the mere sequence of chronological events and enter into the inner dimensions of his prophetic state, a state where human frailty and divine omnipotence met in the most profound harmony ever recorded in the annals of sacred history. The life of Zechariah is a cosmic exposition of how the divine prepares the ground for epical shifts in human consciousness, using the most unassuming, humble instruments to overturn the entrenched arrogance of worldly empires. In the classical Islamic tradition, particularly within the deep reflections of spiritual masters such as Imam al-Haddad, Ibn Atta-Allah al-Iskandari, and al-Hakim al-Tirmidhi, the life of Zechariah is frequently cited as the supreme embodiment of the spiritual station known as Rida, absolute, unshakable contentment with the divine decree. Contentment in the prophetic sense is never a passive, defeated resignation to oppressive circumstances. Rather, it is an active, radiant state of the heart that remains completely anchored in peace, knowing with absolute certainty that every delay, every hardship, and every season of withholding by the Almighty is itself a profound, hidden form of giving. For nearly a century, Zechariah lived in the physical realm of withholding. His home remained devoid of children, his society descended into deeper corruption, and his physical body marched inexorably toward frailty and decay. Yet, throughout this protracted trial, his heart never once conceived a negative thought about his Lord. He never questioned the divine wisdom, nor did he allow the absence of an heir to diminish the incandescent joy with which he served the sanctuary and crafted wood for his community. This profound internal equilibrium was the foundation of his ability to foster Maryam with such extraordinary purity. In the spiritual psychology of sacred mentorship, a guide can only elevate a student to the level of spiritual purification that the guide has personally attained. Had Zechariah harbored unhealed wounds of resentment, unresolved bitterness about his own childlessness, or subtle inclinations towards spiritual envy, those hidden spiritual toxins would have subtly polluted the atmosphere around Maryam's upbringing. But Zechariah had completely conquered his own ego, *nafs*. His home, his workshop, and his service in the temple were utterly cleansed of self-interest. Therefore, when he brought provisions to Maryam's elevated sanctuary, he brought with him an aura of unadulterated peace, creating a sacred vacuum within which the spirit of Maryam could ascend directly to the highest stations of proximity to the divine without the slightest earthly impediment. The profound dialogue regarding the out-of-season fruits within Maryam's sanctuary continues to be a fountain of inexhaustible contemplation for mystics and philosophers. In the language of spiritual realities, *hakika*, Maryam represented the pure, unblemished capacity of the human soul to receive direct divine outpouring, *fade Allahi*, without the mediation of standard physical instruments. Zechariah, representing the consummate master of the sacred law, *Sharia*, and the physical stewardship of the sanctuary, recognized that this miraculous provision was a direct invitation from the divine to transcend all standard human calculations. In the sight of God, the categories of possible and impossible do not exist. These are limitations inherent only to created, finite minds that measure reality through the narrow prison of sensory observation and chronological time. When Zechariah witnessed those winter fruits flourishing in the heat of summer and summer harvests dew fresh in the bitter cold of winter, his soul immediately recognized that the Creator was revealing the pure essence of divine causality. The physical universe is not an autonomous machine operating on self-sustaining mechanical laws. It is an open canvas upon which the divine command continuously paints reality moment by moment. The same creative word that commands the sun to rise, the seasons to turn, and the earth to bring forth green shoots from dry soil is perpetually capable of commanding the dormant, calcified biology of a 100-year-old patriarch and a barren matriarch to burst forth into living, righteous life. Thus, when Zechariah raised his hands in the secret depths of the night to utter his immortal prayer, he was not merely asking for a son in the ordinary, biological sense. He was stepping into the cosmic stream of absolute monotheism, declaring that the divine will reign supreme over all physical laws, all biological clocks, and all social expectations. His prayer was a radical, revolutionary act of absolute spiritual rebellion against the tyrannical worldview of materialism that seeks to confine human hope within the narrow boundaries of physical calculation. He looked at his brittle bones, his crown of frost-white hair, and his wife's lifetime of barrenness, and he treated them not as insurmountable barriers, but as the raw, transparent canvas upon which the infinite power of the Almighty would manifest its greatest masterpiece. The celestial granting of Yahya was the definitive vindication of this unyielding faith. Yahya's very name, chosen directly by the heavens and untouched by human tradition, was a profound metaphysical declaration. Yahya, meaning he who lives, or he who is brought to life. This holy child was the living embodiment of divine vitality bursting through the apparent death of nature. From his earliest infancy, Yahya was endowed with a profound, transcendent wisdom that bypassed the standard developmental phases of ordinary children. He walked through the dusty fields of Judea not as a seeker of childhood games or worldly amusements, but as a consecrated soul whose heart burned with the purest flame of divine love. He inherited from his father the profound art of spiritual discernment, the fierce love of truth, and the complete detachment from the fleeting honors of this temporal world. Together, Zechariah and Yahya stood as an impenetrable moral bulwark during the final, catastrophic twilight of the Second Temple era. They were the living conscience of a nation that was rapidly selling its soul to the iron empire of Rome and the decadent luxuries of the Herodian court. While the compromised religious leadership in Jerusalem busied themselves with calculating temple revenues, securing political appointments from Roman governors, and silencing any voice that threatened their comfortable status quo, Zechariah and Yahya carried the unadulterated flame of prophetic truth into the public consciousness. They reminded the rich of their moral duty to the poor, warned the powerful of the inescapable judgment of the Almighty, and called every individual back to the fundamental purity of sincere repentance and unyielding faith. The ultimate martyrdoms of both father and son Yahya beheaded in the bleak fortress of Machaerus to satisfy the dark, incestuous whims of a corrupt court, and Zechariah pursued into the ancient grove and sawed through the hollow of the sheltering tree were the inevitable, glorious climaxes of their prophetic missions. In the grand economy of sacred history, the ultimate test of a prophet's devotion is his willingness to seal his testimony with his own lifeblood. The physical agony of the saw and the blade lasted only for a fleeting, temporal moment. The spiritual honor, the eternal rank, and the universal reverence bestowed upon their souls will endure across the infinite corridors of eternity. When the bloodthirsty mob and the corrupt authorities looked upon the severed tree and the broken bodies, they congratulated themselves on having permanently eradicated the inconvenient voices of moral judgment. They believed that through the sheer application of physical violence, they had secured their political dominance and preserved their institutional authority. But history, guided by the unerring justice of the Creator, delivered a swift and devastating verdict upon their arrogance. Within 4 short decades, the very Roman power they had desperately courted turned upon them with apocalyptic fury. The Second Temple was leveled into dust, the Herodian dynasty was extinguished into ignominy, and the corrupt institutions of Jerusalem were pulverized into ash, leaving behind a legacy of universal historical condemnation. In stark, glorious contrast, the legacy of Prophet Zakariya and his miraculous son Yahya rose into the highest heavens, becoming an immortal sanctuary of hope, faith, and inspiration for billions of human beings across the globe. Today, across the diverse landscape of world religions, their names are spoken with profound love, reverence, and spiritual awe. In the sacred recitations of the Quran, in the foundational narratives of the Gospels, and in the contemplative reflections of spiritual seekers in every corner of the earth. The story of Zechariah continues to shine as an unquenchable, eternal beacon of divine light. For modern humanity walking through an era marked by intense existential anxiety, rapid technological noise, widespread cynicism, and profound spiritual hunger, Prophet Zakariah stands as a timeless, loving guide for the soul. He calls across the centuries to every weary traveler, reminding us that true dignity is found in honest labor, that true power resides in absolute surrender to the divine, and that no circumstance, no biological barrier, and no worldly tyranny can ever limit the boundless, miraculous ocean of God's mercy. Through his unblemished life of carpentry, his tender guardianship, his sacred silence, and his ultimate sacrifice, Prophet Zakariah assures every searching heart that no prayer whispered in the dark is ever forgotten, no winter of despair is permanent, and the light of divine truth will forever reign supreme over all the shadows of human history. In the grand, final vista of prophetic history, the narrative of Prophet Zakariah reaches its eternal crescendo, standing not merely as an ancient chronicle of personal piety, but as the supreme philosophical and spiritual cornerstone of human faith against the encroaching tides of worldly despair. When we cast our final gaze across the sun-drenched, rugged ridges of the Judean wilderness and look beyond the shattered remnants of the Second Temple, a majestic, unshakable truth emerges. The true legacy of a human life is never inscribed upon the temporary limestone of architectural monuments, nor is it preserved through the fragile military decrees of earthly empires. True immortality is etched exclusively within the human soul's radical alignment with the uncreated, boundless reality of the divine. Throughout the vast, winding corridors of time, empires have risen with colossal ambition, built monumental palaces of polished marble and gold leaf, marshaled iron legions to subdue the vulnerable, and constructed complex institutional bureaucracies to preserve their temporal power. The Roman eagles that once cast their suffocating shadows across the courtyards of Mount Moriah, the corrupt dynasties of client kings like Herod who ruled through paranoia and public violence, and the compromised factions of the religious aristocracy who traded the purity of their sacred covenant for political prestige, all of them believed they were the absolute arbiters of history. They operated under the pathetic, short-sighted illusion that through surveillance, political maneuvering, and the brutal application of physical force, they could dictate the destiny of humanity and silence the eternal voice of truth forever. Yet history, under the sovereign and unerring guidance of the Creator of the universe, has delivered its absolute, definitive verdict. The palaces of the tyrants have been pulverized into desert dust, their lineage extinguished into historical dishonor, and their monumental cities buried beneath layers of forgotten earth. The grand Herodian temple, which the corrupted leaders of Jerusalem sought to preserve at the horrific cost of sawing through the flesh of the blameless patriarch Zechariah and severing the neck of the fearless prophet Yahya, was reduced to smoldering ash within a single generation by the very imperial legions they had sought to appease. Not one stone was left standing upon another, and the corrupted order that had betrayed its prophetic conscience was swept into the winds of catastrophic oblivion. In stark, blinding, and eternal contrast, the humble carpenter of Ein Karim rose into the highest celestial spheres, his name forever illuminated as an immortal monument of pure devotion, boundless patience, and radical faith. 6 centuries after the saw tore through the ancient sheltering tree, when the final revelation of the Quran descended upon the Arabian desert, the Almighty did not preserve the memory of the Roman Caesars or the opulent vanity of the Herodian court. He immortalized the soft, trembling, whispered prayer of an impoverished, white-haired old man who called upon his Lord from the depths of an aching, sincere heart. That whispered supplication, recorded in the eternal verses of Surah Maryam and Surah Al-Imran, transformed Zechariah's life into a universal sanctuary of solace and hope for billions of human beings across every continent, language, and culture on Earth. Across the vast landscape of global faiths, the memory of Zechariah and his miraculous son Yahya remains an unblemished, shared treasure of the human spirit. In the daily recitations of Islamic worship, his name is spoken with profound reverence as a paragon of constant remembrance, patient endurance, and selfless spiritual guardianship. In the sacred traditions of Christianity, his prophetic canticle preserved in the Gospel of Luke continues to be sung across centuries as a glorious hymn celebrating the rising sun of divine mercy, visiting a world trapped in the shadow of death. In the objective annals of classical historiography, his steadfast integrity stands as the definitive bridge between the ancient Mosaic covenant and the transformative dawn of universal redemption. For the modern seeker walking through the tumultuous landscape of the 21st century, an era frequently plagued by overwhelming sensory noise, hypermaterialistic distractions, institutional cynicism, and profound existential anxiety, the life of Prophet Zakariya offers an indispensable, life-giving compass. His century-long journey through this world speaks directly to every human heart that feels broken, forgotten, aged, or trapped in the suffocating winter of deferred dreams. He stands upon the high summits of sacred history, whispering across the span of 2,000 years that no human circumstance is ever beyond the transformative reach of divine mercy, that natural laws and biological limitations are mere veils before the unconstrained command of the Almighty, and that the silence of heaven during seasons of long waiting is never an absence of love, but the deep, quiet preparation of a cosmic miracle. Zechariah teaches us the sacred power of intentional silence, showing that before we can speak transformative truth to a chaotic world, we must first quiet the frantic clamor of our own egos, still our turbulent anxieties, and immerse our inner faculties in the continuous remembrance of our Creator. He demonstrates that a life of honest, humble labor shaping wood with patient, calloused hands, providing a safe sanctuary for the spiritual elevation of those entrusted to our care, and refusing to compromise our moral principles for the glittering scraps of worldly power is of infinite, eternal value in the sight of God. He reminds every parent and mentor that our greatest legacy is not the material wealth or social titles we leave behind, but the moral courage, spiritual authenticity, and unwavering integrity we cultivate in the generation that follows. Above all else, Prophet Zakariya stands as the ultimate, eternal champion of human hope against the absolute abyss of despair. His life proves to every wandering soul that when we strip away all pretense, acknowledge our utter helplessness, and place our deepest pains before the Lord of the worlds with pure, childlike trust, the established orders of the physical world bend, the frozen winter yields the miraculous fruits of summer, and the barren desert of our existence blossoms into a magnificent, eternal spring. Through his unblemished life of carpentry, his tender guardianship over the mother of the Messiah, his fatherhood of the desert herald, his sacred silence, and his supreme martyrdom, Prophet Zakariya remains an immortal beacon of light, guiding humanity across the boundless corridors of time with an eternal, unquenchable flame, proving forever that truth can never be conquered, faith can never be silenced, and the mercy of the Lord of the heavens and the earth is forever boundless, victorious, and supreme until the end of all creation.